committee has recommended action to close the disability employment gap, and we began further scrutiny of the failed Garden Bridge project. Can I just say, sadly, the trustees declined to appear before us at the last meeting. We also published our report into the Crossrail delay. The education panel investigated the impact of secondary school exclusions, and we released a report on temporary housing, which has increased, as we all know, recently in the capital. We also responded to announcements about the emergency services network delay, Grenville Tower cladding, dementia funding, and the Committee on Climate Change and Heathrow. We also had our annual meeting and set out the new chairs for committees in one of the appendix in the pack you have. Go to item 2, declaration of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest which they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Okay, no declarations. Thank you for that. And now we come to item 3. This is where the Assembly receives the Mayor's report covering the period from 8th March to 2nd May 2019. The Mayor is going to give us a 5-minute oral update. He can take less if he wants to, on matters occurring since the publication of his report. And I've already received one request for an update, which has been provided to the Mayor from Assembly Member Boff. So over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. Chair, I'd like to start by paying tribute to our dear friend Samantha Heath, who passed away recently. Sam and I were both elected to Wandsworth Council in 1994, and as an Assembly member and an environmental campaigner, Sam helped devise some of the policies we're now implementing at City Hall. I know we'll all miss her dearly.
Thank you.
On April the 8th, we launched the landmark ultra-low emission zone to help reduce toxic air pollution and to protect Londoners' health. And I'm pleased to report that the ULEZ has been a huge success in its first month. On the 17th of February 2017, when I announced plans to bring in the ULEZ, the percentage of vehicles driving into Central London zone that were compliant was 39%. Since the 8th of April this year, when the ULEZ began, 74% of vehicles detected in the central zone are compliant. That means that they have met the ULEZ standards over an average 24-hour period. Vitally, we've recorded a large reduction in the number of older, more polluting, non-compliant vehicles, with over 9,400 fewer of these vehicles detected on average every day in April compared to March. And this excludes days which were affected by disruption or unusual traffic behaviour, such as bank holidays. This is building on the success of our other measures. As a result, since February 2017, there were 36,100 fewer older, more polluting, non-compliant vehicles seen in the zone on an average day, a reduction of around 58%. This is already translating into real-world improvements in air quality, including a reduction of approximately 20% in nitrogen dioxide roadside concentrations in central London. This shows that I was right to ignore the Conservative objections to my measures to protect lives, and I'd ask all Assembly members to join me in now supporting the ULEZ for the benefit of all Londoners. Since we last met, I've also been working...
just a moment, we've got a standing order.
The Mayor has, as he has done repeatedly in previous circumstances, misrepresented the Conservative group's position on the ultra-low emission zone. We are not opposed to the ultra-low emission zone. We have said this repeatedly. There are 2 policy papers that were published 2 years ago where we welcome the ultra-low emission zone. As the Mayor well knows, the reservation we have is about bringing it in early because of the impact it will have on small businesses. But we are not opposed to the ultra-low emission zone. We were in favour of it when it was conceived by his predecessor, Boris Johnson. We remain in favour of it now.
Yeah. No, sorry members, respect to the mayor, to the member, he raised a standing order, and can I just make it clear to members, we are going to be respectful for the next 12 months of each other and this body. And if we're not, then we might as well just adjourn and all go off and do whatever else we think we have to do that is as important as representing London and holding the elected Mayor of London to account. I thank Assembly Member Bacon for bringing that to our attention through proper use of a standing order. And I say this to the Mayor. We've heard the leader of the Assembly clearly say they are in favour, but they have differences. I hope that you will accept those differences and then we can move on.
Well, Chair, I accept, but the Conservatives oppose me bringing these forward to April 2019. It's just been confirmed.
That's right.
All the improvements I've talked about wouldn't have happened had I listened to their objections.
Right.
And it's also been agreed they're against me extending this so those who live up to the North and South Circular can also see the benefits. And I'm pleased he's clarified this, Chair.
Thank you.
There was no doubt. We've been very clear.
And there are other ways that we can really get to this on the Environment Committee and elsewhere. And maybe a plenary where we are dealing with papers in front of us as members with the facts. Okay, now, any...
Chair, I've not finished.
You finished?
I've not finished.
You've not? Okay. How many minutes have you got left?
Well,
4. Okay, well, carry on.
Well, Chair, can I thank the Tories for that point of order. I hope the future ones are as helpful as that one were to me. Since we last met, I've also been working on a number of other strategies and initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. This includes releasing figures that show a record-breaking number of affordable homes were started with City Hall support last year, continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime, not only by cracking down on criminals, but by tackling the root causes of violent crime, and continuing to stand up for the best interests of Londoners by putting pressure on the government to give the British people the final say on Brexit. Thank you. I look forward to answering further questions this morning. Chair, as you indicate, there's been one request for an oral update, which I'll deal with now, with your permission.
Yes.
The oral update is a request from Assembly Member Boff on GLA housing figures. 14,544 affordable homes were started in London in 2018-19, more than in any year since City Hall took control of housing investment. This includes 3,991 homes at social rent levels, the most since the end of the last Labour government's affordable housing programme. It also includes the most council homes started in London since 1985, a tribute to the work of boroughs across London and the impact of my Building Council Homes for Londoners programme. We should not underestimate how much of an achievement this represents, because supply in London and around the country has been severely affected by the government's shambolic mishandling of Brexit, with the Bank of England now forecasting a fall in housing investment in 2019. It is crucial to emphasise that to truly build all the affordable homes that Londoners need requires national government to play its role by devolving far more funding and powers to London. We currently receive only a fraction of the funding needed, despite sending record amounts of stamp duty revenues to the Exchequer every year. The government makes over £3 billion from London's property market every year in stamp duty, but only sends around £0.7 billion back in affordable housing funding.
That's it? Yes, that you finished? Yes. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, you've restated what was in your press release, that more homes were started at social rent levels than ever before. So how does your 3,991 compare to the 11,329 that were started in 2010-11 and the 10,663 homes that were started in 2009-10 and the 7,439 that were started in 2008-2009?
So control over London's affordable housing budget was not devolved to the Mayor until 2012. The homes started in 2010-11 and the other year mentioned by the Assembly member were funded by a far larger programme that the last Labour government introduced and that the previous mayor had no control over.
So, Mr Mayor, is that an argument for City Hall not having control of the affordable housing budget if you're going to build less?
That's an argument for the government investing more in affordable housing. The current government is investing far less in affordable housing than the previous government. The first 3 years of the first term of Boris Johnson, the Labour government's money was being spent on affordable housing. Since 2012, it's been your government that's been investing or not in London, and it's also at the same time as devolution from the HEA accountable to ministers to a London devolution from 2012 onwards. And since the devolution in 2012, the largest number of homes started was last year, the largest number of social homes started was last year, the largest number of council homes started was last year.
So why were you patting yourself on the back at achieving a record amount of investment from the government?
It's a record investment since devolution to London during this government's time. So during the last Labour government, in 2009-10, for example, the government was spending more than twice what this government is spending per year in London. According to experts, we need to spend 4 times that to reach the level of affordable homes we need.
Okay. Mr Mayor, on the figures that you published, the 14,544, which is once again, on the very low levels of the targets that you've agreed with government in order to justify that record investment. How many of, on that figure, how many of those are restarts or double counting?
I'm not sure, but whatever the restarts figure is, they deal with the governments from 2015 until 2022. So if in a previous year the start wasn't completed, it goes within the 116,000 target agreed with the government. So there's no benefit of, in your words, double counting.
And so, you don't know how many restarts?
No, because the restarts from 15, 16 and 16, 17 are still counted towards the 116,000 targets. There's no benefit in double counting.
You claim to have met your minimum target for 2018 and 19 by around 500 homes. So can you explain why 500 homes have now disappeared from the previous figure of 2016-17?
If that's the case, it's because they didn't complete the terms of the contract. But there's 2 safeguards we have. One is a clawback mechanism. If by 2022 the houses haven't completed their starts, we can claw back the grant. The secondly is you can't double count them within the 116,000 because the government would rule them out. There's an audit process and an accounting process and an alignment with government. So the good news is there are various checks in place to avoid so-called, what you call double counting.
And you've asked, last time you declared figures, about 10% of those starts that you claimed with 12,000 odd starts, 10% of those were restarted and double counted into the figures. How do you anticipate a similar figure, about 10% for this 14,544?
I expect for 15, 16 and 16, 17 there may well be some starts that weren't completed, but I'd expect there to be hardly any, if any, starts not completed from 17, 18 or from 18, 19. But the good news is that the government won't give us the benefit of double counting, so the 116,000 takes into account these 2 years as well. So you can't benefit from your so-called double counting.
Are you, well, you can if it, in terms of meeting a figure, a target, an annual target, you certainly can by shifting it from one year to the next, which is what I suspect you've done. But are you concerned that 3 years into a programme, and with only 3 years to go, only 30% of those new homes have been started?
And the main reason is because of the bad years in the first years of the programme when the other guy was in charge. So 15, 16, 16, 17 were bad years. Roughly speaking, 7,000 starts in each of those years. A big, steep increase in 17, 18, and an even bigger increase in 18, 19. And so we'll make up the ground lost in the first 2 years under the previous mayor.
You agreed the 116,000 figure with the government, did you not?
And the government included the 2 years under the previous mayor.
But you agreed that 116,000 figure, saying you were going to deliver that.
Which included the first 2 years of the previous mayor.
Fine,
and that's one of the reasons why we agreed with the government to have targets that go up each year. So, for example, In 17-18, the target was 12,500, big increase from the 7,000 under the previous mayor. Last year, the target was steeper, even more, 14,000, and in the coming year, the target is 17,000. The government realised there'd been a lack of progress, I think, in the first 2 years of the programme under the previous mayor, which is why each year there's going to be a steep increase.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other supplementaries to what you've heard this morning? No, thank you. So let's move now to questions to the Mayor as set out on the priority order paper. The first question is number 2019/9155, entitled Government Response to Climate Change, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. It's an inescapable truth that we simply cannot continue to damage the environment the way we have been. We need an urgent step change in the way we think and act in order to tackle climate change. We need those with power to take action now. I'm proud that London has been leading the way on climate action. We were one of the first major world cities to publish a detailed climate action plan that has been independently assessed to be compatible with the aims of the Paris Agreement to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. I'm doing everything in my power to make that plan become a reality with our world-leading ultra-low emission zone by ensuring new developments are zero carbon and insulating homes and workplaces. But I only have the powers and resources to achieve less than half the emissions reduction required to make London zero carbon by 2050. So you're right to ask what the government's response should be, because only they have the powers to deliver the majority of the emissions reductions we need, and they're simply failing to do so. Firstly, the government needs to adopt the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change and bring the rest of the UK in line with London's zero carbon ambitions. Then it needs to lay out proper policies to meet those targets. This includes reversing the cuts they've made to previous climate policies, like those that support rooftop solar. The government also needs to beef up and enforce the weak policies it currently has in place. For example, it needs to properly regulate the energy efficiency of buildings or devolve powers to City Hall to do so. The Treasury needs to set out the cost of the transition to zero carbon and incorporate it into the next comprehensive spending review. And importantly, people need to be engaged in how we tackle the climate emergency. It is essential that government properly responds to citizens on this important issue, and I want to make sure that Londoners have a part to play in this. I said I'll explore the idea further with government, but as they hold the vast majority of levers to deliver the urgent action that we need on climate, they must take a lead. The government's current position is untenable, and it must take action now.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Mayor. Ramadan Mubarak to you and to the family. I take on board what you're saying. I think there's a series of very concerning things where I'd like to see the government step up, and I'd like to ask your view. Do you think the prominence of climate change as an issue at the moment is going to create a useful focal point for opposition to Heathrow and trying to persuade the government to change their mind?
I hope so, but I think the government's been quite stubborn about its views on Heathrow. There are huge concerns around the environment. I think it'd be the extinction and environmental disaster. That's also the view of many experts. We're keen to make sure that we use the levers we have to challenge the government. So we've, with a number of councils and a number of NGOs, brought a case challenging the government. Unfortunately, we was unsuccessful at the first instance. We're appealing that to the Court of Appeal. There are many questions about the expansion's consequences: air pollution, noise quality, the rail and road surface links to the airport. And so we're concerned that the government, in the form of the Secretary of State for Environment, is talking the talk, but they're not delivering in relation to some of their policies.
I mean, you spoke earlier in your statement about the amazing success in just barely more than a month of the launch of the ultra-low emission zone in central London, although we obviously heard from the Conservatives that they didn't want it to happen at this time. We need to go further. There's no national scrappage scheme, there's no National Clean Air Act, and of course we have no access to the Clean Air Fund. Now, we know the Conservatives are starting to run a campaign about cleaning up the air in the tube. Have you heard that they're lobbying the government for a Clean Air Fund, diesel scrappage and access to the Clean Air Fund?
So far, I've seen no tangible evidence of assistance from this side of the Assembly in relation to lobbying the government on this very important issue. It's really important to realise that actually we are doing what we can without any assistance from the government. So the T-charge, the ultra-low emission zone, the London diesel scrappage scheme have all been done without the government's assistance. The gains we're making have been done without the government's assistance. The irony is The government's using the gains we're making to justify the Heathrow expansion in relation to air quality and other gains we've made. And it's really important we get the help from the government. We can't wait for a CSR when that happens. We need announcements now from the government to show bold action.
Extinction Rebellion, who obviously have been very visible on the streets, have also been highlighting how detrimental plastic is, and there's been publicity this week, finally, not very much about the fact that it also is produced from fossil fuels, as well as the fact that it's all over the environment and actually harming marine mammals particularly. What more can you do to build on your very successful water refill scheme, which is helping Londoners reduce their single-use plastic water bottle use? Well, what else can we do?
On that, can I give you some good news? In the first 12 months of us having the fountains that we've got, they've already filled the equivalent of over 155,000 500 millilitre plastic water bottles. That's what we're showing the progress we've made with 20 fountains we've got. We're going to roll out another 100 fountains. We're working with Thames Water trying to speed that up. And you'll be aware that this weekend is the Hackney Half Marathon. They're following Harrow's lead and having a plastic bottle-free half marathon. And also the London Marathon is working on next year's marathon being plastic bottle-free as well. And it shows the difference the public raising awareness can make to those in positions of power and influence.
That's great to hear, Mr Mayor, after 8 wasted years before you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Boff, TfL Advertisement.
Thank you, Chair. Almost 40% of children aged 10 and 11 in London are overweight or obese. This is among the highest rates in Europe, and the issue is even more prevalent in the poorer parts of our city, with child obesity twice as high in the most deprived parts of London, like Barking and Dagenham, compared to the more affluent boroughs like Richmond. This epidemic costs the NHS billions of pounds every year. The evidence, including from Cancer Research UK, shows that advertising impacts on consumer choices. That's why our policy to ensure that advertisements of food and drink products that contribute to child obesity on the TfL network do not feature products high in fat, sugar and salt is an important part of our package of measures to reduce childhood obesity. It's been overwhelmingly welcomed by the public, health experts and food campaigners, and it's good to see major retailers continuing to advertise on the TfL network through amending their advertising copy or by choosing to advertise healthier products. TfL has been working with advertisers since the policy was announced and will continue to work with them to answer any questions they may have as the policy develops. TfL routinely updates their own marketing materials and always seeks to ensure these materials are compliant with their own advertising policies. When carrying out an audit of their own advertising to check whether they contained any HFSS products, TfL took a cautious view and updated 4 campaigns, 3 ad campaigns and 9 poster-based maps, which included images of HFSS products like fizzy drinks and pizza. These adverts had been up on the TfL network from before the ban came into force. TfL took a cautious view and updated these campaigns. We're very committed to reviewing the policy after 1 year. This time frame will mean we can also take into account any changes to the nutrient profiling model following Public Health England's current review. I'm pleased others, including local authorities and the government, are following our lead. The government recently announced their own proposals to restrict advertising of HFSS food and drink on TV and online before 9 p.m. These government proposals also use the Public Health England's nutrient profiling model that we're using.
Thank you, Mr.
Assembly Boff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said to Philip Schofield, when you were interviewed by him, that ads had not been changed, had not been taken down. Do you now accept that that was an error on your part?
I think what I said was that strawberries and cream aren't banned, and they're not banned.
So you said, we've not banned strawberries and cream from being advertised. He then says, but you took the ad down, though. And you said, no, we didn't. Do you accept that that's wrong, that you actually did take the ad down? I'm
quite clear, strawberries and cream aren't banned from being advertised on the tube. It's possible to apply for exceptions, and I was quite clear in relation to my answers.
Yeah, you've explained that in very fulsomely. Did the ad get taken down?
TfL took the decision to take down some adverts. I've mentioned they took down 4 campaigns, 3 ad campaigns and 9 poster app maps which included images of fizzy drinks and pizza.
And strawberries and cream.
I'm not sure if that's one of the adverts, but they took down the numbers I've mentioned.
But you said to Sir Philip Schofield that that advertisement for strawberries which included strawberries and cream was not taken down.
Advertising strawberries and creams.
Do you accept that that was a mistake on your part?
No, there is no ban on advertising strawberries and cream on the
That's not
TfL
what I
network.
asked, Mr. Mayor. I asked very simply that you were challenged as to whether or not that ad had been taken down. You said no, we didn't. Were you wrong?
No, I don't resile from saying that strawberries and cream aren't banned from being advertised on the TfL
I'm
network.
not asking you whether or not they are banned. I'm asking you whether or not that ad was taken down. Was that ad taken down?
I've mentioned a number of adverts were taken down by TfL, not because they breached the ban, but because they want to set a good example.
Absolutely, but when challenged by Philip Schofield, you said the ad had not been taken down.
Well,
Who was wrong?
what I was being asked was, are strawberries and creams banned from being advertised on the tube? They're not banned from being advertised on the
What
tube.
what you were asked was whether or not the ad was taken down. I mean, I'm going to keep going on
Please
this.
do.
I've got
Please
5
do.
minutes.
I think you had 37 minutes, but
allocated
carry
for
on.
my group, and I can keep asking
Please
the
do.
same question.
Please do.
Was the ad taken down?
So I continue my position, which is that advertising strawberries and cream is allowed on the TfL network.
Was
because you're not
the ad
targeting
taken
children.
down, Mr. Mayor?
I've mentioned a number of adverts were taken down by TfL, and I've listed the ones that I know, which is the ones that include fizzy drinks and pizza.
So that ad, that doesn't include the strawberries and cream ad. Was that ad taken down, Mr. Mayor? You do not know whether or not that
No,
ad
the
was
briefing
taken
I have is, during a recent audit, TfL took a cautious view and amended 4 campaigns which showed potential HFSS products, including fizzy drinks and pizza. What I do know is that advertising strawberry and cream is not disallowed, and advertisers can apply for exemptions.
So you were asked whether or not that ad was taken down. You are not now telling me you did not know whether or not that ad was taken down. Is that correct? You're not sure?
No, I'm quite sure strawberries and creams are not banned from the TfL network.
I did not ask whether or not they were banned, Mr. Mayor. I asked whether or not the ad was taken down. Are you not sure whether or not that ad was taken down?
Well, it may have been one of the adverts taken down, the adverts that I've read out from my briefing, but I'm quite clear.
Okay,
That
Okay.
TfL
we're almost there. We're almost there.
Assemblymember Buff, I'm just going to intervene here. I'm just going to make a statement so that people know what's going on who are watching. Groups are allotted time in the 2.5 hours. And so if they wish to use, and it's up to them how they use their time, I would just ask Assemblymember Boff, he's just said he's going to continue with one line of questioning and one
Until I get an
question
answer, Chair.
for the next 5 minutes. And, excuse me, and so as soon as that timing is up, then we will move on. And is the Mayor aware that he has every right under our standing orders to do this?
Of course.
Okay, so then let's get into this bit of charade.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, Chair, this is not about our right to just ask questions. It's our aim to get answers.
You have 5 minutes with the Mayor.
And you're saying now, is it right that you are not sure whether or not that ad was taken down? Is that the case?
What I'm saying that I'm sure about is I was asked, are strawberries and creams banned from the TfL network?
No, I'm not addressing that. We've
What-
already gone over that, Mr. Mayor.
See-
Philip Schofield
So have you
said
accepted
to you...
that? I'm unclear, Chair,
Philip
whether that's been
Schofield said
accepted.
to you, you took the ad down, though, and you said, no, we didn't. I'm just trying to find out whether or not you've made a mistake.
Well, the previous question was, to you, you asserted to me that I'd said,
that was a different question.
Okay, but
We've
do you
moved on
accept-
from that. This is this question.
I'm clear. Do you accept that I was right when I said strawberries and cream aren't
No,
banned?
it doesn't work that
You
way.
don't
no,
ask me questions,
no, you
Mr.
don't
Mayor.
ask us questions.
If you want to stand for the London Assembly, I'm afraid the nominations are up at the moment. Perhaps
Excuse
you
me.
might want to grab one of their seats.
Assemblymember Bob,
But-
stay with your question.
But I want to know whether or not you were clear in your mind when you answered Philip Schofield, when you said that ad was not taken down.
I'm clear in my mind when I gave the answer to Philip Schofield that the strawberries and cream weren't banned.
That's not the question I asked you, Mr. Mayor. I asked you whether or not that ad was taken down. Was that ad taken down?
I've already explained in my answer 5 minutes ago that during the recent audit, TfL took a cautious view and amended 4 campaigns which showed potential HFS products, including fizzy drinks and pizza.
So let's assume now that strawberries and cream are obviously banned on the underground, let's move on, because I just don't understand how you can't understand the question. All I want to know is, were you certain in your mind at the time that the ad had not been taken down?
Chair, there's an assertion in the question that's incorrect. Strawberries and cream aren't banned from being advertised on the tube. That was an assertion made in the question.
So when Philip, let's try again. Try again?
It's your time.
Well, we'll give it one more go. One more go. Was the ad that featured strawberries and cream taken down?
I've not got a list of all the adverts taken down, Chair, but during a recent audit, TfL took a cautious view and amended 4 campaigns which showed potential HFSS products,
So is that,
including fizzy drinks and pizza.
are you saying to me that you can't tell me whether or not that ad was taken down?
But, Chair, I've not got a list of all the adverts amended by TfL.
And did that include the strawberries and cream?
I've not got a list of all the adverts.
So you don't know?
Well, I've read you the briefing that I've got.
You seem to know when you took the answer to Philip Schofield. Thank you very much, Jeff. It sure is. I love strawberries and cream, and I think they should be advertised on the underground.
And the worst advert for a Senator Member Boff.
Oh. I'm going a bit vegan at the moment. So.
When you're ready, members, let's hear an answer to Assembly Members Russell question on preparing London for rapid global warming.
Thank you, Chair. Urgent action must be taken to reduce the impacts of climate change. I'm already taking some of the most radical action of any world city to adapt our city to our changing climate. The aim is for London and Londoners to be resilient to severe weather and longer-term climate change impacts of flooding, heat risk and drought. We're tackling this with policies in our environment strategy and London plan, including reducing overheating in buildings, managing flood risk on transport and encouraging better use of London's water. We're making sure that Londoners know when heat waves are forecast and what to do to protect themselves by promoting the Met Office of Public Health England's heat wave alerts and advice. We also ran London's first Flood Awareness Week last November to help Londoners understand how to prepare and what to do if their home is flooded. Through our funded programmes like the Greener Cities Fund, I'm making sure we have more green spaces in London that are better at holding and slowing down rainwater to reduce surface water flooding. Working closely with the transport, health and food sectors to develop plans to address the impacts of our changing climate. My London plan contains robust policies to ensure new development is well adapted to climate change and resilient to severe weather. This includes more measures like green roofs to help absorb and slow rainwater to reduce flooding, as well as helping to cool buildings so they don't overheat by installing shading. My team's also working with the Environment Agency to ensure London remains well defended against tidal flooding, including successfully calling on neighbouring authorities to ensure that land is safeguarded for a new Thames barrier, which is likely to be needed in the 2070s. TfL is also working to make its network more resilient, including modifying stations to address flood risk. I'm also holding water companies to account to increase their resilience and that of London's water, plan for new water resources and reduce leakage. However, the majority of levers for tackling climate change lie with the national government. That's why I'm urging ministers to listen to the growing concerns and either take action or devolve powers and resources to cities like London so we can do what's needed to tackle the crisis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I recently sent you my report on climate risks for London, which looks at the risks and impacts that Londoners are expected to experience in the next few decades in terms of floods, heat waves and severe weather events as a result of rapid global warming. So it's good to hear the list of things that you are working on. Now, the report highlighted some big gaps in research. For example, there are 643 schools in London that are at high risk of flooding. However, there's a lack of research on the impact of this risk on teaching days and pupil attainment. There's another example of a big gap on heatwave risks to London businesses, how they will cope during heat waves and droughts, the impact on their employees, their well-being and productivity, working in buildings that weren't designed for these conditions. So will you do the research or make sure that the relevant bodies do it to address these and other gaps that are identified in my report?
Can I thank Chair through you the Senator for her report and for sending that to me and the recommendations made. My officers have been gathering and publishing data, but it's time to take action now. What's more important now is that we move from research into action. That's what we're doing. We are working closely, though, with the Committee on Climate Change, DEFRA, and the Environment Agency to ensure we access the latest data and research in this field. My officers and the London Climate Change Partnership have been working closely with health, food, transport and emergency service sectors to develop plans for sectors to manage the risks and impacts and identify actions to be taken. And the work also involves convening sector partners and relevant experts, and you've mentioned some of them, Senator Russell, hospitals, temperature data to assess whether they're overheating, links between transport disruption and higher temperatures, identifying thresholds which are crucial for planning to prevent disruption. And we're facing our sector-based approach towards housing, workplaces and schools in future phases.
Thank you. Do you have a timetable for this work so that we can follow what you're planning and keep track of how you're doing? Well,
the London Climate Change Partnership is going as fast as they can with my officers. Some of this is contingent upon the sectors bringing information forward. A lot of this data, by the way, we've also put out there on the data store, Chair, so it's accessible to others as well who can help.
Thank you. At the plenary meeting last year on your draft economic development strategy, I asked you to commission an assessment of the economic risks of climate change and to include this in the data sets in your final strategy. It wasn't included in the final strategy. Will you do this now? That's commission an assessment of the economic risks of climate change.
I mean, the danger of spending all our time doing research is we're not taking action. And I've said in answer to the previous question, more than half of the steps that are needed to reduce carbon emissions have got to come from the government. We can only do less than half. So unless the government changes tack, we won't make any progress. That's why we're working closely with the Committee on Climate Change, DEFRA and the Environment Agency, as well as lobbying central government directly as well.
Of course, but I mean, even your Mott MacDonald report that you published last May said that most small and medium-sized enterprises do not have or only have limited business continuity plans and would struggle to maintain operations during a severe drought. So these are urgent issues, and actually you do need to have that research so that Londoners can prepare themselves. Now, you mentioned the London Climate Change Partnership. My report also recommended a substantial increase in budget for them. The GLA gives them £62,000 a year, which includes funding for one staff post. So will you carry out an urgent review into the funding that the London Climate Change Partnership needs to scale up their vital work to prepare London for climate breakdown? Well, it's worth reminding colleagues that since I became mayor, we've begun hosting the partnership from 2017 and funding the Secretariat. But we also support the partnership in other ways, recognising the benefits they bring, and we'll carry on giving them all the expertise, information and advice they need. So it's not simply budgetary assistance, but it's other assistance we give them as well. Is that a yes or a no? That's what continues to help them as we've been helping them. Okay, but you're not necessarily going to give them any more money? We're not going to directly increase their budget immediately, but we are going to carry on helping them and scaling up the work they're doing. Okay, thank you. I'm out of time.
Assembly Member Curtin, taxi trade.
Thank you, Chair. London's iconic taxis are an important part of London's heritage and provide a vital service to people right across the city. Taxis are wheelchair accessible and offer Londoners and visitors an important door-to-door service at times and in places where public transport options may be limited. I've made my support for the taxi trade and its place in London's transport network clear. Both my transport strategy and the comprehensive taxi and private hire action plan that we published shortly after I was elected show this support. However, London is growing rapidly, and this brings with it challenges for air quality and congestion. My goal is for 80% of journeys to be made by walking, cycling or on public transport by 2041. We'll travel by these space-efficient and healthy modes of transport, and less travel using private cars will be essential to improving air quality, reducing congestion and making our streets safer. Tackling pollution is a public health priority in London. New measures are required to combat poor air quality and improve the health of Londoners. These measures can include new road schemes that will make it more attractive to walk or cycle. Across London, boroughs and the City of London are introducing new road schemes for environmental reasons and in some cases for safety-based reasons too. When considering significant changes to their roads, highway authorities are required to follow due process. This includes carrying out consultations and equality impact assessments where appropriate. I would expect the impact on wheelchair users and passengers with mobility issues to be fully taken into consideration before a scheme is put into place. TfL is preparing guidance for boroughs to ensure that a consistent approach to such schemes is taken across London, and this will include information on taxis and private hire vehicles and accessibility.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fine words, but I'm sure you understand that all taxi drivers have a legal requirement to pick up a fare. They're not allowed to refuse a fare if a passenger gets into the cab. And there's a lot of schemes which are coming in under your administration which are restricting taxi drivers access to certain roads, which means that they simply can't do their job. As it's a legal requirement, don't you think this needs a rethink?
Chair, I mean, I'm unclear. So the Assembly referred to, under my administration, I've brought in schemes that are stopping taxis using roads.
Such as Tooley Street, and then also there's the Tottenham Court Road restricting access to taxi drivers along there, which is being funded by TfL.
Let's deal with both of those. So Tooley Street was still up to consultation. We've not responded yet, so it's a premature assertion to be made by the Assembly member. Tottenham Court Road is a Camden-run scheme, Camden Council.
It's being funded by TfL.
Well, we fund a number of schemes, but we believe in autonomy. You either believe in councils as having autonomy or you don't. And so it's a council scheme. And
it's something that you are, in favour of.
Well, what I've said in my answer is the council and others who have these schemes must make sure they carry out equality impact assessments, and that includes the impact on those who are disabled. In the Tottenham Court Road scheme, what the council's undertaken, as I understand it, is to make sure the roads that go across Tottenham Court Road are all accessible for the taxis, so those people who are disabled will still have access as near as they can from the taxis and the roads that go across the Tottenham Court Road.
I'm sure you know that there are 57,000 taxi card holders in London. They're given out by the boroughs, and people who have taxi cards are often wheelchair bound or have other disabilities, like they may be blind, for example. Taxis are a vital support for these people. They need taxis to get around. For those people, by restricting access to certain roads in London, it's going to make life very, very much more difficult for taxi card holders. Now, you mentioned doing an equality impact assessment, but some of the schemes, if they come in, which are going to restrict taxis' access to roads, are going to hurt these people. So don't you need to have a rethink of restricting taxi access to certain roads?
Well, I think we just agreed, Chair, that I'm not restricting access for taxis to any roads. We're consulting on Tooley Street. We'll be responding shortly. What we are doing is preparing guidance for boroughs to ensure a consistent approach to such schemes across London. That include the guidance, information on taxis and accessibility as well.
Will you be bringing in any more schemes like Tooley Street, or putting out any more schemes for consultation where taxis are going to have their access restricted, or is this the last one?
I'm not sure. I can't foretell what happens in the future in relation to...
Well, you have a transport strategy, so that deals with what you want to do in the future, and so you must have some kind of clue as to what you want to do in terms of allowing taxis to either continue to use the roads that they're allowed to use already, or possibly restricting them in the future.
I'm quite clear. I think public transport is very important for those Londoners who need access to a wheelchair-accessible taxi.
So can you say that all the roads that taxis are allowed to travel on now will not be restricted in the future? There will be no more plans to restrict taxi access to roads in the future while you're the mayor. Can you say that?
No, you can't set in stone a policy for our city going forward with a growing population and with transport changing, with technological advances and the rest of it. I think that'd be a very unwise thing to do.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, you must realise that the taxi trade is really under an existential threat at the moment. I mean, when you came into office, there were 23,000 taxi drivers. The numbers now, as I understand, are down to below 20,000, and the numbers of people taking the knowledge of London to become taxi drivers is fallen through the floor. One figure I have is now down to about 200 in a year. I mean, there needs to be something done to boost the taxi trade, to ensure that it continues, to ensure that the numbers of taxi drivers are kept to the same level. Why do you think that there's been such a drop in the number of taxi drivers and a drop in the number of people who are doing the knowledge of London under your administration?
Well, the number of taxi drivers has been going up for some time. The numbers of those doing knowledge have been going down for some time. The previous two mayors were also not loved by the black taxi trade. But if you see the plans we've brought into place since I became mayor, the action plan, there are more bus lanes now have accessibility to taxis than before. I think 95% of bus lanes under the TfL's road network are accessible to taxis. 93% of all bus lanes on the general road network are accessible to taxis. We've made sure there are more taxi cab ranks since I became mayor. We've improved the awareness of the knowledge and improving its status.
Mayor, I'm going to have to stop you because I'm nearly out
There's
of
a
time.
big list of things I've done to help
We've
taxis,
gone over this ground
which you've
before,
interrupted.
and you have done some things, but you know it's also a little disappointing that you couldn't say that there will be no further restrictions on taxi access. So you know we'll have to communicate further about that. Thank you, Chair.
For the use of the existential. We haven't heard that one in a question.
Not just a pretty face.
It seems to be the word of the moment. It's everywhere. Assembly Member Cooper, Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. The first point to make is that the United Kingdom is still in the European Union, and that is good news for London's economy and business. Because any economic impact assessment, our own, the government's and all others, show that we're better off remaining in the EU. The bad news for our economy and business is that the uncertainty caused by the threat of Brexit remains. And worse still, it seems that the government is still determined to leave the EU with a bad deal that would greatly weaken our economy and hit living standards in our city. Unfortunately, there's no sign that the government plans to use the remaining time of the Article 50 extension wisely. Until just last week, it pretended the European Parliament elections weren't even happening. The extension to Article 50 until October has postponed the threat of no deal, but it's still a very real and grave threat. That's why the work of the London Resilience Forum will continue to ensure the capital is prepared in the event that the UK crashes out of the EU with no deal in place. For many businesses, making sensible plans to prepare for Brexit remains nigh impossible, but I'm helping businesses to access information and supporting face-to-face advice through the Brexit Business Resource Hub. I'll continue to take all steps necessary to mitigate the negative effects of Brexit, but the paralysis it caused by this government cannot continue. Instead of running down the clock yet again and then asking for a further extension, which we may or may not get, the Prime Minister should put the national interest first and withdraw Article 50 so that we can take the prospect of no deal off the table completely. This would allow the necessary breathing space to give the public the final say on Brexit with the option to stay in the EU. That's the right way forward now for London and the whole country.
Well, it would be nice to think that the government could actually make a decision of any description, but they don't seem to be able to agree in Cabinet or indeed with the DUP, their partners, on anything at all. So assuming that they're unable to come to any kind of agreement about revoking Article 50, what do you think they should spend this time during this extension doing in the next few months that's really going to help businesses in London? The economy only seems to be being buoyed up by stockpiling, according to economists. I think we're in a desperate situation. What would you like the government to do to support business?
Well, by the way, the stockpiling that many businesses have done is creating a drag on the economy. And so it may have led to a decent growth figure for this quarter, but there are concerns about what it means for the next quarter. Businesses want certainty, but they don't want the certainty of a no-deal crash. And one of the things the government can do is realise that Parliament's in gridlock, realise that the Prime Minister can't get a deal through her Cabinet, let alone her party, let alone through Parliament, is to give the British public a final say. Do we accept the deal negotiated by this government with the EU, or the deal that's got the most support in Parliament, with the option of remaining in the European Union? I can't think of anything more democratic than giving the British public a final say. Do you accept the deal done by the government, or do you want to remain in the EU?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Mr Mayor, I want to ask you about EU students following Brexit. If they are treated as international students, they will be only entitled to stay and work for 4 months. Do you agree that they should be able to stay for at least 2 years, and preferably longer.
Absolutely, preferably longer. I recently met the heads of our universities in London. They are really concerned about the consequences of Brexit on their ability to continue to be world leaders in higher education. It's not simply the undergraduates, not simply the postgraduates, but a huge amount of research takes place after that, which leads to one of the reasons why businesses come to London. Is that pipeline of talent, innovation that we do, because we've got this access to EU talent. And I'm really concerned, as indeed our universities, about the consequences of the government's stance on EU students.
Joe Johnson has said that the policy is not competitive. And you have recently had Sam Gyimah MP, the ex-Conservative Universities Minister, saying that this approach, together with possibly increased fees for EU students, means that the government's approach is being seen, and I quote him, as being against young people. Is that a sentiment you would agree with?
Yeah, it's against young people, it's against talent, it's against our future. I mean, so if you're a student from the EU, and you're being asked to pay foreign fees to come to London, there is no reason to come here rather than America, Australia, Canada, elsewhere in the European Union. And so we are giving these incredibly talented people to our competitors. It doesn't make sense. Actually, with EU students being here, we can collaborate with European cities and others rather than being competitors. And I think this is a foolish response. It's a knee-jerk response. Because they think being seen to be tough on EU students will garner support in elections, and I think that's a false choice to make.
And of course it will restrict opportunities for our young people, our young Londoners, who may find it more difficult then to study abroad, as one of my own children has done. Do you see this as an extension of Theresa May's hostile environment with regards to immigration targeting our young people?
Well, I think one only has to examine the policies from the previous Home Secretary and some of the things coming from the current Prime Minister to see the evidence that there is clearly a hostile environment from the government. Clearly there is an issue in relation to her stance on foreigners and on immigrants, and I think Theresa May has a track record of making poor decisions when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, in fact, it was under her as Home Secretary that the 2-year for international students' right to work was reduced to 4 months. You've recently held a meeting, as you said, with higher education establishments. Are you conveying their concerns to the government?
I am. So one of the things that we agreed to do after the meeting was to make sure we continue to meet regularly, but also for us to lobby the government jointly and separately to make sure they understand the concerns we've got. One of the reasons why we're a city that's attractive to investors is because we have the largest number of top universities of any city in the world. We've got the largest number of foreign students of any cities in the world, and that leads to a talent pool that employers, that life sciences, that tech, creative industries find really attractive, and we're in danger of losing that because of the foolhardy policies of this government.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you. What do you consider the priorities for Brexit now to be after the extension for Londoners of EU origin during this longer period of uncertainty?
Well, I'm really worried about how they're perceiving their own future here. One of the things that we're trying to get across to them is that they're welcome here. We're grateful for the massive contribution they make. You'll be aware, unlike Theresa May's bus going around London telling people to go home, we had a bus going around London saying we're all Londoners, trying to encourage them to stay here, to make it easier for them to stay here. This extension doesn't remove the uncertainty from them, and it's really important that we put out a hand of friendship and make them feel welcome.
What will be the impact of this continued uncertainty on public services like the NHS? When we hear that last week the Nursing and Midwifery Council reported that over the last 2 years, almost 5,000 fewer nurses and midwives from the EU are now working in the NHS, which is a drop of 13%. Last year, just 33 midwives from other EU countries came to work in the NHS.
We have a record number of vacancies in the NHS in London. It's causing a huge problem to the NHS. I meet senior leaders of the NHS regularly, but also visit NHS institutions regularly, but also social care. The numbers of our older population who rely upon social care being provided by EU workers is phenomenal. Teaching, construction, finance. There is no industry in London, no sector, hospitality, not affected by the government decision, not improved and enhanced because of the role of EU workers. And it's a real concern that although we've got an extension until October, it doesn't seem the government's making any progress in relation to a deal, nor is it making progress in giving the British public a further say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? No? Okay, let's then move to a question from Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you, Chair. I've long made the case for why a national vehicle scrappage fund targeted at cities across the UK is needed to support motorists in ditching polluting vehicles. Air quality is a national public health crisis and requires national action. However, as central government has so far refused to fund a national scheme, I've had to do what I can to provide some support for Londoners in replacing their vehicles. In February, we launched the van scrappage scheme, providing £23 million in targeted funding to support micro businesses and charities in London to scrap older, pollution vans and minibuses. I also announced a further £25 million in scrappage funding this year to help low-income Londoners to prepare for the expansion of the ULEZ up to the North and South Circular roads in October 2021. This is an innovative scheme that TfL are developing from scratch. They need to carefully design it to ensure that the limited funding available is targeted at and benefits those who most need it. My team and TfL are working together on the proposals for the scheme, such as the eligibility criteria, the level and types of payments available, and the application process to make this investment stretch as far as it can, given the potential scope. This also means engaging with stakeholders to ensure that we design a scheme that works effectively and is launched later this year, well ahead of the ULEZ expansion. For years, government has incentivised and encouraged people to purchase diesel cars. If we're going to tackle the health crisis and social injustice caused by air pollution, it's vital that the government now help people switch to cleaner alternatives and fund a national vehicle scrappage scheme.
Thank you for your answer. So it was over 3 months ago you announced this £25 million car scrappage fund. As you've just said, there are no details yet, but clearly a lot of work's going on to get this scheme right. But I want you to be bolder, rather than just enabling people to scrap a diesel car and get financial help to buy a less polluting car. Will the car scrappage scheme include, for example, mobility credits, where Londoners could get money for public transport, car club membership or use of cycle hire?
Very good. That's exactly the thing we're looking at. So a number of things. Firstly is trying to get from the DWP information about in-work benefits, out-of-work benefits, how we define who is the pool of people that get the money, the sort of inverted commas, poorer Londoners. But secondly, what the path is. We don't want people to leave from one scheme and make one polluting vehicle and get another polluting vehicle. If it's possible to help them use public transport or walk and cycle or share, that's something we should encourage. And so we're looking into what we can do to signpost them away to other alternative forms of moving around London.
So, so this car scrappage scheme could be more about modal shift, and London streets, as you know, are too crowded, parking's a challenge, and we need fewer cars full stop in the capital. So I'm wondering, will you agree to specifically look into mobility credits as part of this, and also in part of your lobbying of government for a national scheme?
Well, can I say yes, Chair, and go even further and say I'd be very keen for you to meet with our team as well to discuss any ideas you've got. We're open for ideas. The opportunity we have is, unlike the scheme for vans, businesses often need a vehicle to get things around if you're a plumber, electrician or whatever. Families don't necessarily need a car in the traditional sense that they own to get around our cities. So all ideas gratefully received.
Thank you. I mean, in the announcement around your van scrappage scheme, it allows small businesses to access third-party offers from rental and sharing services across London, such as Zipcar and others. So what I'm hoping is that this car scrappage scheme will go further than that.
I think it should, and I want it to. And that's one of the reasons why, rather than announcing a scheme with full details early doors, we're consulting, listening, engaging and working on what works best for our city. The good news is, you heard the figures from the first month of ULEZ Central London. People are changing their behaviour. There are fewer vehicles overall coming into Central London, hopefully because people are walking, cycling, using public transport.
Yeah. And your van scrappage scheme for micro businesses, which is really welcome, but it has very specific conditions that the businesses must be registered with Companies House or be VAT registered. However, some sole traders, so those very small micro businesses, don't meet these conditions. For example, a local gardener who needs to carry equipment around but is not VAT registered, is not registered with Companies House. So in actual fact, far from helping some of those smallest businesses, you're excluding them. Will you look at potentially reviewing the criteria to ensure sole traders are included so they can shift to cleaner vehicles?
The Assembly will be pleased to know, and I've already announced this, so I'm not giving away any secrets, that we are reviewing it, and we'll be announcing shortly details for sole traders in the next few days, hopefully weeks. We realise actually many sole traders who are working hard weren't eligible because they're not limited for a variety of reasons, and they want to do the right thing. What we're doing is now working on how we can make it easy for them to apply for the London diesel scrappage scheme to help them move away from polluting vans.
So you're looking at announcing that in the next few
In the next
days?
few weeks, I'd be surprised if it wasn't announced in the next few weeks. We think we're almost there now. We're just tweaking it and stuff, and so I'd be surprised if it wasn't announced sometime this month.
Well, I'd be welcome contact from your team on that. I've had representations made from sole traders. If I could have that information as soon as possible.
Happy to do so, Chair. Happy to write it in a moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Devonish, Hammersmith Bridge Action Plan.
Thank you, Chair. I understand how disruptive the closure of Hammersmith Bridge will be proving for local residents and businesses. Transport for London is working very closely with Hammersmith and Fulham Council to confirm plans for restoring the bridge as soon as possible. Engineers from both TfL and the Council have completed a detailed assessment of the bridge's condition and are now working urgently to confirm options for this complex restoration. This work is close to completion, and TfL expects to have estimated timescales and costs in the summer. TfL is funding the ongoing investigation and design work and is lending the Council every support to expedite this complex stage of work. TfL will work with Hammersmith and Fulham Council to identify appropriate funding once they have a clearer idea of costs. The bridge is 132 years old and was never designed for modern traffic. It is a complex structure, including cast iron and timber, and has been reviewed or closed a number of times in the past. Weight restrictions have been in place since the 1990s. Width restrictions were installed in 2015. The number of buses crossing the bridge was restricted in 2016, and there were short closures in 2017 to allow repairs to the bridge decking surface. The situation illustrates how important it is that London has the certainty of a long-term, steady and sustained government funding arrangement to allow it to cover the costs of its own infrastructure maintenance. London's roads are significantly underfunded, in large part due to the decision of the previous mayor to cut TfL's operating grant. On top of this, the government has unbelievably made the decision that from 2021, the £500 million raised every year from car owners in London through vehicle excise duty is going to be spent on roads outside the capital. Nevertheless, I realise how frustrating the closure is and have asked TfL to do everything possible to minimise the impact. TfL has recently announced details of changes it is making to the local bus network to improve links for people affected by the closure. These changes will be introduced on Saturday, 18th of May, and include rerouting services to provide direct links to the tube network at Putney Bridge, as well as a new direct link between Barnes and Hammersmith. TfL will continue to monitor the situation to determine whether further changes are required.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think at the beginning of that answer you said that we'll get an answer for a date of reopening sometime this summer. Can I push you for a clear date when you'll be announcing the date that the bridge can be reopened, please?
I can't be more specific because TfL is doing the ongoing investigation work. They're also doing the work required in relation to design and preferred option. They think it will be done this summer. They're going as fast as they can. They're working closely with the council to do this work.
Can I ask you to review who was responsible for the bridge being closed initially? Because you'll know from previous questions I've asked you, this has been on the agenda for a long time, and I think there's been a bit of ping-pong between TfL and the council. Do you agree with me the very fact the bridge has closed represents a failure of management?
Not at all. It represents the reality of an old bridge being used in modern times and the bridge not being able to cope with the number of vehicles using the bridge. And what's happened is the regime was put in place for there to be regular inspections. Those regular inspections discovered a crack for very good reasons. The council took the decision to close it. TfL supports that. This bridge takes more than 20,000 vehicles every day, including 1,000 buses. It was never designed for that.
And could I urge a sense of urgency, because it's not everybody who can walk and cycle. Yesterday I was down at the bridge and residents were saying to me that they have friends in sheltered accommodation one side of the bridge who feel they're trapped in their homes because of their age, that they can't cycle, they can't walk the distances, they can't even get to the revised bus stops. What do you say to those kind of residents, and how can we really speed up at least the partial reopening of this bridge?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real concern. That's one of the reasons why TfL have announced the rerouting of the buses, and they'll continue to monitor this. As far as the bridge opening, that will be determined by the advice received from the engineers carrying out the work they're carrying out. That work's got to be carried out. We've got to make sure the bridge is safe. The Assembly member will be aware there have been weight restrictions put in place for some time. There have been marshals there as well as gating to make sure not more than one bus goes over the bridge at a time. Double-decker buses stopped using that bridge some time ago. There was some reinforcement work done in the past. TfL have spent in the recent past, £5 million in enforcements, bus enforcements, ongoing investigations. They're currently spending between £3 and £4 million to try and make sure the work can be undertaken so we can find out what needs to be done to reopen the bridge, what are the options, what are the costs and how we do it.
Thank you. And just one final point. Could we review the consultation, the communication policy during this process? Because in the last week it's not been bad, but before that, literally 25 to 30 days, neither myself, the constituency MPs or the councils were getting much information from TfL at all, but things have sped up in the last week.
Sorry, is that actually the buses?
The buses and the whole what's actually happened, what are you doing? We got no communication whatsoever, despite writing to you and to TfL. But in the last week or so, it has improved.
Well, Joe, what I'd say is the bridge is owned by the council. TfL is working with the council. I'll make sure that TfL contacts the Assembly member in relation to buses and rerouting, but also I'll ask TfL to speak to the council about improving comms if there's an issue about comms, because local residents and businesses need to know what's going on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Chair Arbour.
I wonder, Mr Mayor, if you can tell us how much TfL has in its reserves.
Not to hand, but I can write to you and give that information.
Okay. Would you agree that the figure is in excess of 1.5 billion? Okay, well, I've looked at it and overall. Do you think an appropriate use for reserves is to deal with emergencies?
It is, except for, unless the reserves are earmarked, but in general terms, reserves can be used for emergencies. I think TfL's reserves may be what's prudently advised to keep in reserves, but I need to check.
Yes, you're right. Much of the reserves are earmarked. Do you not think that the closure of a bridge is an emergency?
It is. I think the particular problem with this bridge, Deputy Chair, is it's not owned by TfL, and there are accounting rules in relation to use of capital monies. So, for example, one of the things that TfL can't do is use capital monies for something not in its control. You probably know accounting rules better than I do. And that's one of the reasons why in the past it's been revenues that have been used to improve the bridge and repair the bridge. That's one of the things that TfL are grappling with, is the accounting rules and the use of monies.
On the 11th of April, Assemblymember Devonish and I wrote to you and suggested that the closure of this bridge was force majeure, and in the light of that, you should step in and take action and settle how the matter is going to be dealt with in relation to the arrangements with Hammersmith and Fulham. We haven't had a reply to that letter. Do you not agree that this is force majeure, and under those circumstances it is appropriate for you, who are responsible, if you like, for strategic matters in London, should step in?
Well, I think we'll be very careful how one defines force majeure. I mean, some things are outside of our control, and we're going to be very careful setting precedents. I'm more than happy to look into why you've not received a response. But the bridge isn't owned by City Hall, it's owned by the council, and there are other examples where there are big problems in relation to things owned by third parties where we'd be reluctant to step in. We've got to be very careful not stepping in, but we're more than happy.
No, Mr. That's like how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. My constituents in Barnes and Assembly members Devonish's constituents in Hammersmith, and I would suggest actually this has a knock-on effect right across London, the closure of this bridge. That's no answer to those people to say, it's not me, Gov, it's Hammersmith and Fulham's fault. What you ought to be doing, if I may suggest with a great humility, is that you should say to Hammersmith and Fulham, this really is existential for people in West London, and the thing needs to be made good. And what we will do is, because TfL have the expertise, it's not that TfL haven't known about this problem, and indeed you've listed in your initial answer to Assemblymember Devenish the number of times that works has needed to be carried out on the bridge in recent years. So this can't have come as something where TfL hasn't had some kind of knowledge that this might happen. In effect, what I'm saying is you ought to behave like a statesman. You shouldn't behave like a borough leader. You should be speaking for the whole of London, and you should step in and say, we will do this, we will marshal the resources of Transport for London and get this job done and pay for it afterwards and see who is appropriate. If I can suggest an analogy with this, is, for example, after a major rail accident, which is an emergency, and indeed I would say conceivably could invoke force majeure, I cannot believe for one moment that you wouldn't step in. Let us suppose the accident has happened by a TfL bridge or something of that sort, and see that the work is done and direct all those resources accordingly. Can I please ask you, will you act as a London-wide statesman and do this work?
Well, it's a long question, but let me deal with the number of points raised. There's a presumption made in your question that TfL are failing to help the council. That's not true. So, as I've said, TfL is currently paying for the expert work being undertaken to see the scale of the work required. TfL is paying for the engineering work. TfL is paying for the ongoing investigation work. TfL is paying for the design work required, and TfL is paying for the options that will come forward. The separate issue is the issue of who pays for the bridge to be repaired. We've not arrived there yet. So let's first do the work in relation to what the options are, what the cost is going to be, and then we can discuss who will pay for the bridge to be repaired.
Honestly, Mr. Mayor, this isn't an argument, it ought not to be an argument about who pays. That's a matter which can be dealt with instantly, eventually. The real problem is what is happening now. The enormous delays which are being caused, the excess pollution. I'm sure that Assemblymember Cooper is very unhappy about the excess amount of traffic which is going through Putney, which in fact is undoing all the good work which has happened because of the anti-pollution work that you have carried out under different measures. I would suggest to you that the daily costs of this measured in every conceivable way, does point to an emergency, does point to a crisis, and in a crisis, as the kind that I've explained, like after a rail crash or something like that, you move heaven and earth to do something about it. You don't argue about who pays and how it's going to pay. You say this needs to be done. You cannot deny, Mr. Mayor, that TfL actually has the physical resources to do this, and I would say that it's a kind of insult, as you indicated to Assemblymember Devenish, to say we haven't even got a date, to tell you the date when we might be finding a date to do the work.
Well, Chair, I think the Assemblymember is, for the purposes of a different audience, not the one here, making points that I didn't say. I've been quite clear. TfL has moved as fast as we can to do the work required to see what's required to reopen the bridge. The Assemblymember is assuming the bridge can be reopened in days or weeks. I'm making the point we don't know until the work's undertaken by the engineers, and the engineers are working extremely hard. And yes, I'm not going to hesitate from advertising the fact TfL is paying for this, because we don't care about where the responsibility lies. We're paying for this work undertaken. And so to criticise, as the Assemblymember is trying to do, I think, either me or TfL for not moving quickly enough it's just not fair, because TfL have been moving on this for some time, working with the council in relation to paying for some of the work in the gating, the marshalling, paying for the work undertaken now, and are going as fast as they can to see what's required, and then I'm sure we'll move as fast as they can to get the work that are required to be done to open the bridge as soon as you possibly can.
Okay,
but I don't see how they can possibly do so without understanding the scale of the challenge.
Okay, I think the point has been made. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you both for that. Let's go back to Assemblymember Devenish, protests in London.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely support the right to peaceful and lawful protest. This is a cornerstone of our democracy. The freedom for ideas and policies to be challenged in public is a vital part of any open and democratic society, and something we should all cherish. I understand many of the concerns the recent protesters had and agree that we need to do much more as a country to tackle climate change and fast. It's an inescapable truth that we cannot continue to damage our environment in the way we have been. However, some of the recent protests were unlawful and placed an enormous burden on our already overstretched and under-resourced police. More than 1,000 police officers were deployed across the city each day, so many of our dedicated officers had to work on rest days while others had to cancel leave over the Easter bank holiday. Overall, over 1,200 activists were arrested for a range of public order offences, with 70 people charged with more to follow. I've placed on record my thanks on behalf of all Londoners for their hard work and determination to keep our city safe. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner has estimated that the cost of police in the process was about £7.5 million. That's why I wrote to the Home Secretary to inform him that I'll be working with the Metropolitan Police to consider a special grant claim to compensate for the cost of police in these protests. The government has consistently failed to fully fund the national and international capital cities grant. The Home Office's own expert panel reviewed the figures. It suggested that the Met should receive £281 million a year. The Met's currently receiving a staggering £95.6 million a year, lower than even this each year. As with all large operations, the Met Police will learn from recent events and are reviewing the tactics used to deal with these protests. However, the Met Police has extensive experience of managing large-scale public order events, so I have every confidence in their ability to prepare effectively, including for the upcoming visit of the President of the United States. We know that London is likely to see a large number of people gathering for the state visit of President Trump. It's always important that the right to freedom of speech and the right to protest peacefully and lawfully is preserved. But it's also important these are balanced against the need to keep Londoners safe. I'll be discussing the policing of the visit with the Commissioner, and we look forward to, we will look to how the Met Police intend to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Would you accept this as an unprecedented shutdown of central London? Were you actually on the ground over Easter? I couldn't frankly believe what I saw, not just for a day or so. We all agree with legitimate protest, but literally central London was shut down.
So I think the question is, was I there?
Were you there?
Yeah.
Do you understand the unprecedented nature of what happened? Sure,
and I was there, and I spoke on a number of occasions each day to not just the Commissioner but members of her team who are on the ground as well doing the policing. What's important is if anybody protests in our city, they speak to the police and make sure they get permissions and respect the law. On a number of occasions, the protesters didn't respect the law, and that's one of the reasons why you've seen a large number of arrests. One of the things the Commissioner is doing is with her expert team looking at reviewing how the police respond to future events like this. It did cause huge disruption to communities and to businesses for too many days.
So in hindsight now, we're a few weeks after, what are your initial lessons for perhaps more robust action? Because we have got President Trump coming very shortly, and whilst clearly people should be able to protest, we can't have the city shut down, in my view, the way it was shut down over Easter, day after day.
Chair, I'm unclear what the member means by robust action.
Well, I'm asking you what you will do, what you're talking to the Met about, to ensure that we don't have whole parts of London sealed off for days. You can't get around London. I'm relatively young. I can walk around London, but most people, a lot of people, literally stayed at home. Their businesses were affected. The elderly couldn't get around London. It was very frustrating at best.
Well, the police have to operate within the law, and the Commissioner made clear in what she said to the Police and Crime Committee the parameters of the law in relation to the Public Order Act 1986. If somebody acts unlawfully, the police will not hesitate to make arrests. The police have seen if there's any lessons to learn in relation to the process that took place over Easter. We've got to all, at the same time, respect the fact that people have a right to protest. It's one of the cornerstones of our democracy, but it's got to be lawful and it's got to be peaceful.
So in terms of disabled and elderly transport users specifically, what provisions were made so they could get round London during Easter, and what provisions will you make for the Trump protests?
Well, one of the frustrations about the protesters were they were targeting public transport, which seems to me counterintuitive in relation to what a climate change protester should be doing. So it had a real impact on public transport. They're also blocking bridges, and one of the concerns we had was not just those who were disabled Londoners, but also the blue light services if they needed to get over a bridge in an emergency. And that's one of the frustrations that we had, and one of the points made by senior officers to the protesters. And it's really important that any protester realises that these are arteries for our city that need emergency vehicles and others to go over. and they've got to realise the massive inconvenience it caused. The police's conundrum is they've got to act within the parameters of the law. If somebody's not committed an offence that's an arrestable offence, there are limited powers the police have, but also the number of officers it takes to remove a protester, when you bear in mind we've got fewer officers now than any time since 2003, is a challenge. On some days, there are between 1,000 and 1,500 police officers just policing the protests. At the same time, as we all know, the concerns around violent crime in neighbourhoods, the good news was we didn't need to extract officers from the violent crime task force. The bad news was many officers were doing 12-hour shifts, cancelling rest days, cancelling leave days.
Can I just ask you perhaps to reflect further on how it really has, particularly the most vulnerable who have been trapped in their houses, and go back and push the Met for next time, because I think it is a real concern for people. I should
just let this member know, the Commissioner has written to the Home Secretary and also the Speaker of the House raising the issue about whether the laws are fit for purpose, bearing in mind they're quite old now, dated, and the way people protest has, inverted commas, evolved. Query whether legislation has evolved fast enough to give the police the powers they need.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Assembly Member Hall.
Mr. Mayor, the protesters were breaking the law. It is against the law to park a boat in the middle of Oxford Circus. It is against the law to block off bridges. And you've just given the real reasons why it's so bad. Blue light services can't get used, etc. If they could remove those vehicles at the end of this very long period, they could have removed them at the beginning. That would have saved millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, all of which should be spent with respect to looking after knife crime, not looking after policing this. Lots of the protesters were saying that they were doing it because you approved of their cause. Well, the people protesting against the President of the United States, they could say the same, that you don't like him and therefore they're protesting. Can you absolutely assure us that robust, and robust means making sure the law is kept, i.e. keeping these roads free, can you assure us we won't see the farce that we saw during these protests?
Well, Chair, it's not for me to give operational advice to the Commissioner, but if the Assembly member thinks she's a better expert than the Commissioner, she's free to do so. I can't discuss publicly some of the operational reasons why the police took the decision not to remove the boat when they decided not to remove the boat. If the Assembly wants to get a private briefing from the Commissioner in relation to some of the challenges they had, I'm more than happy to do so.
Mr. Mayor, take a swipe at me if you like. I actually don't care. But please do remember, you are the Mayor of London. You are responsible for the Metropolitan Police. And therefore, you should make sure that this city can go about its business and people that park vehicles in the middle of Oxford Circus are dealt with appropriately, both in time and in action. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, Chair, can I say, I think what the Assembly has shown is a breathtaking ignorance of how the police operate in our city. Operational independence must lie with the Commissioner. Now, if the Assembly has criticising the police for operational decisions, that's her choice to do so. I'm not doing so.
Okay, thank you. Any more on this point? No. Assembly Member McCartney, support for survivors of rape and sexual offences.
Thank you, Chair. This is an issue that both I and my Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman, take incredibly seriously. I've spoken about my concerns around disclosure practices which risk deterring victims and survivors of rape from securing justice and support. The Victims Commissioner for London has been the leading national voice bringing this issue to prominence. Requests for excessive disclosure can impact victims' confidence to engage with the justice system. This is a view expressed powerfully by survivors and organisations supporting victims. We know that only a small proportion of rapes and sexual assaults are reported and brought to prosecution. This must be changed, and as a society we must do more to create a supportive environment for people coming forward. As part of this, those reporting crimes must be confident that the police and prosecutors will follow disclosure guidance diligently and only access information that is reasonable and proportionate to their inquiries, while of course balancing a defendant's right to a fair trial. The assessment of London's Victims Commissioner and I is that the new updated disclosure consent form produced by the National Police Chiefs Council and the Crown Prosecution Service does not strike the balance correctly. As early as October 2018, the Victims Commissioner led successful calls for the Information Commissioner's Office to conduct a full investigation into how personal materials have been collected, stored, shared and used. This is alongside work listening to affected victims, liaising with victim support groups, raising the matter with government and increasing public awareness through the media. I await the conclusions of the ICO's investigation and am clear that the findings should inform police practice on disclosure. In the meantime, I support the Victims Commissioner and the other police and crime commissioners in their call for the withdrawal of these forms as soon as practically possible. The Victims Commissioner will continue to scrutinise the disclosure process until we're satisfied that victims' rights are safeguarded. Chair, I'd of course be happy to arrange for Senator McCartney to meet with Claire Waxman to speak through this work. Part of my commitment to do everything I can to make London the best city in the world for women and girls is to continue to support and stand up for victims of sexual violence, including through the record investment in services such as rape crisis centres, independent domestic violence advocates and provision for sexual assault referral centres.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for how you have answered this when I've raised this before. When I last raised it, there were concerns that police forces across the country had different requirements. They were requesting different things, and the College of Policing work was meant to sort that out. Well, it has now got a uniformed approach, but as you've recognised, it now has raised other issues. And, of course, relevant information pertaining to the allegations should be disclosed. But as I understand it, some forces are now downloading the entire contents of a phone, and some are only downloading part. And obviously, these days, people's lives are contained on their phones. What can you do to make sure that the Met is only downloading that part that is relevant and necessary?
Well, one of the things we're looking forward to is the response from the Information Commissioner. The key thing is that any downloading is going to be proportionate. Yeah. Of course, we've got to make sure that any trial is fair. We've got to respect the rights of a defendant facing a trial. What we don't want to do is deter victims from coming forward because of a concern they've got about their private life being made public during a court case, and also things that we all have on our phones that aren't relevant to a particular incident we may be dealing with, that we want the public to see. And that's why it's really important for the police forces across the country to have a consistent system, and that includes the Met learning the lessons from the concern raised by a victims group, including police and crime commissioners across London. Claire Waxman continues to speak to the Met Police Service to make sure they understand some of the concerns victims groups have across London.
Thank you. The sanction detection rate for sexual offences is poor, not only in the Met but across the rest of the country, and we need to make sure that this doesn't, as you said, put off people coming forward. But the concerns, I think, centre particularly around the fact that information that is not relevant to a particular offence but that might be downloaded and therefore disclosed will actually just go to discredit the complainant. And we have moved on from 20 years ago when, you know, how a woman behaved, how she acted in public was used to as evidence of bad character, if you like. Are you concerned that this is taking us backwards in this respect?
Can I say, Chair, through you, look, when I was practicing law, often in these sorts of cases that were being defended, the way to acquit your client was to discredit the victim, yeah. To cast aspersion on the victim, to almost victim blame. I think there's been huge progress made over the last 20 years in relation to the protections a victim has, and a judge will normally step in. There are procedural rules now in the court that protect somebody from oppressive cross-examination, from certain forms of disclosure happening. The concern, though, is, and you've, I think, hit the nail on the head, there's under-reporting, there's lack of successful prosecutions, and that's leading to a situation where the concern is that even few people may come forward and report rapes or sexual offences if it's the case that they're concerned about their private life being made public, and all that entails from what they've seen in yesteryear, but also what we see from fictional TV programmes as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're just over halfway through this very informative session. Just anyone out there following us, do hashtag MQT. Let us know what you think about what you've heard so far. The next question is from Assembly Member Desai on demands on the police.
Thank you, Chair. The safety of Londoners is my top priority. It's thanks to the skill, dedication and hard work of officers, police officers, that London remains one of the safest cities in the world. Policing is not easy, and our officers deserve to be properly supported to carry out their essential work. Police officers are being asked to do more and more with less and less. Since 2010, as a result of the government's cuts, the Met has had to make savings of £850 million, and having to make a further £263 million savings by 2022, in total more than £8 billion. As a direct consequence, the number of police officers on our streets has fallen to the lowest level in 20 years, and we've seen the decimation of the very services that help to address the root causes of crime. There's also a very human cost to our officers, the cancellation of rest days and long working days. The Police Federation reported earlier this year that 8 out of 10 police officers across the country have felt under stress or anxiety over the last 12 months. The Met is doing what it can to help officers. It offers a wide range of services to support both their physical and mental health, including counselling and physiotherapy. But it isn't right that officers face additional burdens due to its lack of resources. It's not just policing that's been impacted by this government's austerity. Services that provide support to the most vulnerable in society, particularly youth and mental health services, have also been affected. And in turn, this further increases the strain on policing. But let's be clear, the solution to these rising demands is to properly fund the police service, which needs to happen from the government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last month, I released a report about the decline in morale amongst Met officers due to the strain placed on them because of the government's austerity policies. I found that between January and September 2018, 328,010 rest days allocated to Metropolitan Police officers were called off. You already alluded to the demands on our police officers and expressed your support for them. But I've got to ask you, what is your message for those officers that are working overtime to keep London safe?
Thank you. Thank you. These officers are valued. We value what you do for our city. And earlier on this week, when I went along to a commendation ceremony, I thank the officers for their dedication in relation to keeping our city safe. But here's the other challenge, is at some stage, these council rest days have to be taken. And we've got fewer officers now than any time since 2003. The government promised £100 million in the spring budget. We've now been told we're going to get £17 million. That will pay for a bit of overtime. And so unless we can rapidly increase the number of officers, my message to the police officers who are currently cancelling rest days is, I'm afraid for the foreseeable future, we may need you to do more of this.
On Tuesday, Lee Novels, the head of the National Crime Agency, said that the government needs to fund an extra £2.7 billion to tackle the growth in serious and organised crime. John Apter, the chair of the Police Federation, has said, and I quote, "This is the reality of years of austerity, where we've seen the number of police officers reduced by almost 22,000 as the number of organised criminals has increased," unquote. Do you have the resources you need to combat organised crime in London?
No, we don't. And one of the things that you will know is it's inextricably linked with the increase in knife crime. Organised gangs, drug gangs, drugs coming in from overseas. And so the failure of the government to invest in the National Crime Agency, the failure of the government to invest in dealing with organised crime has a direct impact on crime on our streets.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, the process for deciding police officer pay is now open for the coming year. We've talked about demands being placed on our police officers, rest days being cancelled, overtime and so on. Would you support me in calling for a fair pay rise for police officers funded by national government, which is a policy, which was a motion passed by the Assembly last year?
Absolutely. This is, to paraphrase somebody else, a punch in the nose to our police. The police aren't allowed to strike or negotiate at a local level. That's why an independent arbiter was set up, the PRRB, and the government has got this independent body. It makes a recommendation, the government ignores it. I mean, it just beggars belief.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
The recent HMI report into child protection in the Met was a really worrying read. HMI added in a new recommendation regarding online child protection and highlighted serious limitations with digital forensics. Particularly it's hindering police being able to secure prosecution. So what are you doing to help police officers with this need for new technology and access to digital forensics to help them secure more prosecutions and help stop these horrendous crimes against children?
Deputy Commissioner Steve House lobbied me in relation to the need for us to have more resources to invest in this because he was worried about this. And the good news is some of the new money I announced for the police this year will be used to address this issue.
Great, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was with great distress that I read about the plight of PC Sutton, who was forced to face a misconduct hearing by the IOPC for knocking a suspect moped mugger, who incidentally had no licence or insurance, off his bike. What conversations have you had with the IOPC regarding the pursuit of police officers doing their jobs? And what representations have you made to reverse this trend? Also, have you spoken to the Commissioner, asking her how she intends to protect officers from the IOPC?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Deputy Mayor Linden has raised with the IOPC a number of issues, including the issue of police officers facing disciplinary proceedings, and I speak regularly on this issue with the Commissioner. The Home Secretary has given some new guidance which is helpful. We've got to make sure that we realise that the police, when they pursue somebody on a moped, follow a large number of checks. They're trained, they get authority, and one of the concerns they have is they make often split-second decisions, and then their career and life's put on hold because of a perception that they made the wrong decision. We've got to speed up how the IOPC works, in my view. We've got to speed up how investigations against police officers work, in my view. And we've got to give police officers confidence that if they sometimes make a split-second decision that may be a mistake, they'll have our support, because they're human beings. Officers, I'm not suggesting that police have made a mistake, by the way, generally, officers may make mistakes, and they need to know that we'll have their back as long as they follow the rules. And officers, by and large, follow the rules. They've got a huge amount of training, and they need our support.
For once, Mr Mayor, we are in complete agreement. This really does need to be sped up. The lives that are put on hold of these officers, which is quite absolutely outrageous. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Assembly Member Desai Assembly Member Shaw. Aggravated burglary.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Burglary can have a lasting and profound impact to victims. It not only robs victims of cherished possessions, but also the sense of safety that being in your own home brings. I'm deeply concerned about the rise in aggravated burglary, and want to reassure you that the Met Police is doing all that it can to catch offenders, support victims, and equip Londoners with the right tools to protect their homes. Data shows that the majority of aggravated burglary offences in London occur in the northwest London. To ensure all investigative evidential opportunities are captured and actioned, Northwest BCU now has a designated burglary-focused desk. The Met Police also has a burglary working group and work in conjunction with bordering police forces to capture offenders and bring them to justice. This year, I'm putting more resources into the police response to burglary. In January, I announced £85 million of new funding to tackle violent crime and burglary. This includes a major boost for Met Trace, the Met's flagship burglary prevention programme. Met Trace has proven to work in areas of increased activity. The Met's achieved a 20% reduction in residential burglary. Additional police funding is also delivering support to the victims of burglary, with a focus on pursuing investigations. Now, wherever possible, and particularly if there are investigative opportunities, there will be a personal visit from the police within 24 hours of the crime being committed. Burglary demands a flexible police response. Offenders are known to target certain communities, and the police should be responsive to this. Through the Police and Crime Plan, I've enabled the local police, local authorities and others to tailor their response to burglary, which has delivered positive results. Those boroughs who have selected burglary as a local priority experienced a smaller increase than those who hadn't. There are, of course, things that Londoners can do also to help the police by making themselves less vulnerable to burglary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not surprised to hear that there's increase, particularly in northwest London, when it comes to residential and particularly aggravated burglaries. Certainly, my casework also indicates that it's more than anecdotal as to the number of aggravated burglaries that are happening across here and parts of Brent. Now, the question is that the sanction detection rate for residential burglary fell to 3% in 2018 and 19. Why do you think, Mr. Mayor, police officers are finding it difficult to solve residential burglaries? And I think I'd be right in saying that also the response that residents get after going through traumatic burglaries is not what it should be.
Thank you for raising this really important issue and for raising what is very distressing to many of your constituents who have been the victims of aggravated burglary at this forum. The Met Police are working on an improvement, now has an improvement plan to address some of the issues you talked about in your question. This includes identifying pinch points during an investigation, maximising forensic opportunities, and making sure that frontline officers have proper support from detectives as well. But you're right in relation to how victims are treated. One of the things the Commissioner has announced is that if somebody wants to speak to a police officer face-to-face, that will happen, particularly if there's opportunities to help in the investigation. You'll know in the past, often, victims of burglary didn't speak to an officer, it was reported, and that was it. And so the police are addressing that as well, because it's really important that we address the issue of the fear of crime. If you've been the victim of burglary, you're worried you may be the victim again as well. But also there are opportunities that may come up during a conversation that you won't otherwise get by just one-way reporting.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you see, we are right. The police is right. You are, and we too, in focusing on serious crime, knife crime, etc., which we must do. But at the same time, it is very important that residential burglaries, aggravated burglaries, are also focused as a priority. Because we are talking about not only violating sort of safety of homes, but it is violating people's lives as well who are burgled. Is there or should there not be actually a strategic approach to see how this can be reduced? Because this is a big problem, and we've got to be sure that sort of ball is not the focus is not lost when it comes to residential burglaries.
Well, I think you're right to articulate the distress it causes. More than half of the boroughs in London have said burglary is one of their local priorities. Because it's targeted there, there's better progress made in those boroughs than the boroughs where it's not a local priority. What the Met Police are trying to do is improve best practice across London, which will happen, I think, as a consequence of their improvement plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Assembly Member Bailey, online hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. The Met Police Commissioner and I have both made clear that we have a zero-tolerance approach to hate crime, wherever or whoever it's perpetrated, or however it's perpetrated. In March 2017, I launched the very first online hate crime hub in the UK. This was in response to the growing threat that London's diverse and minority communities are facing, not just on the streets and on public transport, but online. The pilot for the project was funded through the government's Police Innovation Fund and has been extremely valuable in enhancing our understanding of online hate. This includes how and where online hate happens and what impact it can have, but it's also improving our investigative response to these often complex crimes. The hub has built strong partnerships with specialist voluntary sector organisations and social media companies to give us the best opportunity to identify online hate and to get it removed or users blocked where appropriate. Once an online hate crime has been reported, all victims are offered access to specialist victim support through the Hate Crime Victim Advocacy Programme commissioned by my Office for Policing and Crime. So far, over 1,600 cases have been dealt with by the hub since it began operating, and the case numbers were almost double last year compared to the year before. The pilot demonstrated the real value of a dedicated resource to tackle online hate crime, and given the success of the hub model, which is providing centralised expertise to support local officers, the remit is being expanded to cover all hate crime, both on and offline. The team has been increased with 2 further officers to enable a similar approach to all hate crime reports, and in recognition of the fact there's often a connection between on and offline offending. This hub of specialist officers now means there will be an expert oversight of all hate crime that's recorded, whether on or offline, and crucially, borough officers will get the support they need to investigate online hate crime effectively and support victims to pursue justice.
Thank you for your response, Mayor. As you've said in your response, hate crime happens everywhere, and with the forthcoming Al-Quds March, which many in the Jewish community consider to be offensive, and unfortunately some individuals use as a chance to indulge in hate crime, have you asked the police to enforce the recently announced ban on the flying of the Hezbollah flag in all of its forms?
I'm not in a specific discussion in advance of this year, but the police will. I mean, as you'll be aware, I've been calling for the last 2 years for the loophole to be closed. Yeah. The police, when it comes to these sorts of marches, have specialist teams. Sometimes, to explain, Chair, they won't make the arrest there and then. They'll capture the person on, say, video, and then subsequently make the arrest. Sometimes they'll go in and there'll be snatch teams to make arrests. So it's a decision taken by officers on the ground with specialist help, but they're well aware of the change in the law.
So you're confident that the police will pursue people?
I'm confident the police will pursue, but I'm afraid I'm not confident that the march will cause less offence than it has in previous years. I'm not confident there won't be Jewish Londoners feeling incredibly distressed and vulnerable as a consequence of the march. I'm hoping that there will be an improvement. I'm hoping there'll be a change. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But the police are well aware of the change in the law.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware about the accusations that have been made by the campaign against anti-Semitism regarding the MDP march that occurred last weekend?
I'm not sure. I know that one, Chair.
So let me give you an example of some of the accusations that are being made. The keynote speech given by Glenn Sacker, in which he said Jews were in the gutter and reported anti-Semitism was part of the problem. Are you aware of any of these accusations?
I'm not personally aware, Chair, but I'm sure I can check if someone wants me to, whether the police know about them.
Fair enough. Bearing that in mind, do you think it's acceptable for public figures such as Diane Abbott and Richard Bergen to stand alongside these people with the NF when these statements are being made? And would you join me in asking them to distance themselves from this march?
I just don't know enough about. I'm not being evasive. I just don't know the facts you're talking about. I'm happy to go and look into it, and I just don't know.
Well, when you do look into it, please do, because the NF in particular were at this march. Some very harsh things were said about all communities across London, and for me, particularly personally, the NF thing is very offensive. I remember as a young boy having to walk the long way home from school so you didn't have to confront the NF, being called the N-word to your face, and for public figures to be at this march and legitimise it, I think is very poor form, and I'd really like to see you join us in asking them to step away and condemn what went on that day.
So Diane Abbott is at a National Front march.
She was at an NDP march on the stage when these it was a keynote speech. That's a real kicker. It was a keynote speech, and they were there. Richard Bergen was there as well. Diane Abbott actually made a speech, and I just
can I just go? The mayor, I think, has answered and said that he. I mean, I'd rather the question be a direct question to the mayor about his actions, rather than the actions of anybody else.
I feel like, let me say this, Mayor. When you go away and you find out about this, will you write to me and join me in condemning these actions? Because again, the NF will cause, just the mere mention of those two letters together cause a lot of distress for Londoners across London, from all kinds of community, gay community, black community, Jewish community. And for me, this was a very poor form, and I'm just asking you to go away and do the work. I understand you might not know, and then write to me and condemn these actions if you can.
Okay. And will the member just clarify that when he uses the initials NF, what organising
Front.
The National Front he's talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Have you finished now?
Yes. Yeah. I'll give the mayor the opportunity to write back to me.
Anyone else? No. Okay. Oh, Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. A very interesting set of questions from Assembly Member Bailey. Mr Mayor, do you agree that politicians have a special responsibility in setting the right tone for a public debate in the country to make it easier for the police to tackle the scourge of hate crime? And that comments from some from across the way there that said that multiculturalism risks turning Britain into a crime-ridden cesspool contribute to the climate that hate crime takes place?
Can I just say, I condemn those. I condemn those comments. That's quite an easy question to answer. I think we've got to be very careful with the language we use. I think multiculturalism has been a huge source of benefit to London and our country, economically, socially and culturally. I was last night at Grenfell Tower, an iftar breaking event with Assembly Member Gavron was present as well. And what was wonderful was people thought diversity is a strength. There were people there from all sorts of backgrounds there. Nobody thought it was a cesspool.
And do you think, I mean, of course, there are ways that Assembly Member Bailey can put those context, put a context into those remarks.
Assembly Member
Duval.
To
defend what he said at the time.
Assembly Member,
they do contribute
Assembly Member
to the
Duval,
around
can I stop you? Assembly Member Duval.
Is that correct?
I agree.
Assembly Member Duval, can I just say, you've named an Assembly Member, and the questions to the Mayor here are not about Assembly Members' actions, beliefs. It's about his own beliefs and actions. And no, I've made a
point of
statement.
explanation, Chair, then. Sorry, our debates would be very constrained if we did that.
Well,
and I think your ruling's wrong. And I'm
right.
prepared to challenge that.
Yeah.
I'm given the opportunity, and there are opportunities for members to get
Yeah.
up who say things to justify why they said them at the time. We're talking about hate crime and the context about people taking responsibility. The member himself raises it, but he chooses not to defend himself in terms of his contribution to it at a particular time. I think I'm fully justified in raising that.
Thank you for your points of clarification. Now, I will call upon Assemblymember Bailey because he has been named.
Maybe he'll withdraw those. Maybe he'll apologise.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. There's an Assembly member standing to speak.
My understanding of this, Gavin, it was Mayor's question time. We to ask questions to the Mayor. I've sat here for months and watched people ask me questions when the whole function here is ask questions to the Mayor. I asked the Mayor a question. I accepted the Mayor's response. I wasn't difficult about it. I didn't try to score points. I didn't try to be a child. And it's quite disappointing to be in this room and constantly have people conduct the rules in a way that suits them, to suit their endpoints. We're here to represent Londoners, and that's what I believe I was doing. I asked the Mayor a question. I wasn't difficult at all.
Thank you for that response. Let's move on to the next question. And that's a question from Assemblymember Dismore. Londoners still living with dangerous cladding.
Thank you, Chair. I was with some of the community from and around Grenfell Tower last night. The fire at Grenfell Tower was a horrific event which raised immediate concerns about the safety of similar blocks across the country. At the time, the government promised urgent action, but ministers have been far too slow at every turn. It is shameful that nearly 2 years on they cannot say all such blocks are safe. Following the fire, councils and housing associations moved quickly to begin remediating unsafe blocks they own. Many did so before the government agreed to cover the cost of doing so. It was nearly a year after the fire before ministers finally announced funding for social landlords to remove ACM cladding. We've asked the government to broaden its scope to cover other types of unsafe cladding too. But the situation is worse for privately owned blocks. Just 11 privately owned residential blocks with unsafe ACM cladding have been remediated. There remain 164 such residential blocks that still have unsafe ACM cladding, and around half of these are in London. It's shocking that as of the end of April 2019, remediation had begun on just 16 of them. Many people in privately owned tower blocks across London have been suffering from stress and anxiety at living in unsafe buildings, with individual leaseholders facing the prospect of huge bills. It is inexcusable that government have allowed disputes over who pays to delay vital safety works. It took ministers till last week, nearly 2 years after Grenfell, to finally agree to fund remediation work of private blocks with unsafe ACM cladding. It should not have taken this long. I've written to ministers about this 3 times, and just last week I joined the National Housing Federation, the LGA, council leaders and others in support of Inside Housing's End Our Cladding Scandal campaign, calling the government to fund these. Despite the funding being welcome, we still have many questions, such as how ministers will ensure leaseholders are protected from high costs of interim fire safety measures, and how dangerous non-ACM cladding not covered by this fund will be remediated.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer. Whilst the government won't publish the actual numbers of ACM-clad buildings in London and in the rest of the country, which I think in itself is pretty outrageous, would you agree that progress in removing flammable cladding has been at a snail's pace? Figures just obtained reveal that in the social sector in London, 4,600 homes out of 8,400 nationwide have ACM cladding yet to be removed. In London's private sector, 10,600 homes out of the national total of 16,400 are in blocks yet to be remediated. So altogether, 15,200 London homes are at risk from ACM cladding. And the government's new fund for private sector freeholders is only open for 3 months. It is generally seen to be an unrealistic time frame and inadequate in the amount, given the scale of what needs to be done. The GLA has been administering the social sector remediation fund in London. Will you consider how this expertise can be used to get swifter action in the private sector?
Yes, I think you're being very generous when you say the government's moved at a snail's pace on this. We've raised the issue with the government in relation to non-social housing, the scheme, and as part of the discussions officials are having with the government, it's about how we can help them in relation to administering the scheme. I'm concerned about the 3-month window. That's why it's really important to have a scheme that works.
And you mentioned other forms of cladding. London local authorities and indeed the private sector are also facing the need to remove non-ACM fire risk cladding such as zinc composite, copper composite, aluminium honeycomb, high pressure laminates, brick slip systems, reconstituted stone and wood. The government's commissioned a method for testing these cladding systems, but this doesn't measure the toxicity of the smoke released when the material burns, for example. And even then, the testing process was not due to begin until a couple of weeks ago. Will you raise this issue with the government and ask them to explain why they're only addressing part of the problem and not all of the risks that potentially threaten residents, bearing in mind that it's the smoke that kills people rather than the flames normally?
Absolutely, and so we are raising this with the government. So in addition to the snail's pace in relation to ACM cladding, there's the non-ACM cladding that's potentially dangerous, but you're right, there's the toxicity from the smoke when it burns. We'll continue to lobby the government. The concern is they may not make public the results of all this till the end, and what we're saying is they should during the course of the tests, making that available so that action can be taken.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member O'Connell, antisocial behaviour.
Antisocial behaviour can have a significant impact on local communities, leaving people feeling vulnerable, going about their daily lives, and in some cases can escalate into serious crime. I'd remind the Assembly that ASB is a broad category of crime ranging from abandoned vehicles, prostitution-related activity to the misuse of fireworks. Earlier this year, the PCC, under Senator O'Connell's chairmanship, expressed concerns about sharing of best practice across London, and it's a concern I share. I know time is short, so I'm willing to reduce my answer so you can ask supplementary questions.
I appreciate that, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I know time is short. I'm very much in agreement with Navin Shah earlier, because I think I'm sensing there is a problem within the neighbourhoods. We're seeing an increase in burglary, we're seeing an increase in ASB, Mr Mayor, and I think there may well be a causal link with the borough mergers. Will you direct your victims commissioner to do more work on this and to talk to the boroughs with an aim to make this a higher priority in the local neighbourhoods and the local boroughs?
As I thought, good question from Senator O'Connell. So a few things. Firstly, the National Victims Commission has done a report in this area, and I'm sure you've read that, which caused huge concerns, and the London Victims Commission has looked into that and agrees with many of the recommendations, and is working with the police to address some of the issues. The good news is that antisocial behaviour is a mandatory priority for all boroughs, and there is monthly tracking in relation to this in the Met. One of the criticisms of the national report is that the tools that are had in relation to, for example, community trigger and others aren't being properly used, and there is a process to make sure councils take advantage of the tools they have to take action against antisocial behaviour.
And Mr Mayor, the local neighbourhood teams, of which your commitment 2 and 1 is key in addressing antisocial behaviour in the neighbourhoods. And I know Assembly Member Pigeon has asked questions around the cover of particularly PCSOs, and I would ask you to look at that, because I believe, we all know anecdotally, but I believe the fact is that across London the coverage of PCSOs, and that's the subject of one of your questions, Caroline, is not what it should be. And they are keen in addressing antisocial behaviour and increasing confidence in the neighbourhoods. Mr Mayor, would you go back to the Met and to say to them to treat that as a priority, to make sure that PCSO coverage, as well as the 2 dedicated ward officers, is consistent across London?
I will, but I mean, I think the Assembly Member is missing out an important fact from his question, which we have few police officers now in London than any time since 2003. There are fewer than 30,000 police officers. And so one of the things I've made sure when I became mayor is that we protect the 1 dedicated ward officer and 1 PCSO we have in each ward, but we've doubled the amount of dedicated ward officers. In relation to PCSOs, the latest numbers I have is that 92% of wards have at least 1 PCSO, but for reasons to do with sickness, maternity, paternity leave, promotion, retirement and resignation, there can be PCSOs missing. But as soon as we can get more resources from the government and the cuts reversed, the sooner we can increase the number of police officers and indeed maybe PCSOs to have more neighbourhood policing rather than less as we've had in the last 8 years.
I think that commitment of 2 and 1 is a mayoral commitment. I think all members, particularly constituency members, will be looking at that very closely to ensure that that commitment is delivered. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
You've mentioned a couple of times we must get more police officers, etc. 100% agree, which is why we put in the amendment for the budget. But also, you must bear in mind, Mr Mayor, that we are 1,000 officers short of what is in the budget for those officers. If you were up to speed with the amount of officers that you have paid for, then perhaps we wouldn't be in this dreadful state we're in now. Stop asking for more officers when you've got the money for them.
Well, it's worth explaining to the Chair, the reason why the Met Police Service have the budget to recruit more officers is because I increased the budget when the previous Mayor froze it or cut it in the 8 years before. No. It takes 9 months to recruit a police officer because the tap was switched off when the Assembly member's hero was the Mayor of this city. I've now turned the tap back on, but it takes some time to recruit officers. We are recruiting more officers. We think by the end of this year we'll have 31,000, which should be significantly more than we would have had we followed their recommendations in previous years.
Well, thank you. The Conservatives are out of time. I'll have an answer to Assemblymember Twycross' question, and any follow-up is going to be taken by Assemblymember Duval. It's about social mobility.
There are still far too many Londoners who struggle to access the wealth opportunities on offer in our city. I remember the barriers I faced without family ties or a trust fund to rely upon when I was trying to be a lawyer. So when the Social Mobility Commission finds that social mobility has, and I quote, stagnated over the last 4 years at virtually all stages from birth to work, this is of great concern to me. Much of my work at City Hall seeks to address the barriers to social mobility for all Londoners. Head Start Action builds on the work of the award-winning Head Start London to support young people in disadvantaged areas to gain employability skills. The London Enterprise Advisors Network supports state secondary schools, pupil referral units and further education colleges in every London borough to get careers advice to the young people who need it. The Workforce Integration Network is helping young black men, one of the groups we know face particularly barriers to entering the labour market, to build relationships with employers, offering apprenticeships and jobs paying the London living wage. The Good Work Standard will encourage and promote the very best employment standards, including opportunities to progress and develop. And I'll use the devolved adult education budget to ensure skills provisions better meets the needs of all Londoners, particularly those in work, but also those on lower incomes. But I can't do it on my own, Chair. We have to acknowledge the effects that 9 years of austerity has had on Londoners' life expectancy and chances, with funding for early year services, schools, further education, colleges and support through the welfare system cut to the bone.
Clearly you've alluded to about the government's role in this, and clearly that they failed in terms of their agenda over the last couple of years of plunging Londoners into even deeper poverty and inequality. What would be your top 3 asks of government that would really make a difference and help support you and other progressive London boroughs in trying to do something about this issue?
The biggest thing they could do is devolve more powers and resources to London. I don't just mean City Hall, by the way. I include boroughs in this. There are some local and sub-regional things that can be best dealt with at borough level and sub-regional level. Clearly, it's good news you've got devolution of FE. That's only from 19 upwards. What about 16 to 18? That's the real prize in relation to helping young Londoners. Second big area is, frankly speaking, schools have had massive cuts, which is about they can't intervene at an earlier stage. We've talked in here about consequences of exclusion. Well, actually, in Scotland, because the schools are maintained, early intervention and assistance helps that young person not reach the point where they're being excluded. And the third thing is in relation to aspiration and ambition. We've got to make sure young Londoners aspire and have ambition to achieve the very best. But if helping hand, if the assistance they need is taken away, don't be surprised if they lack ambition and aspiration and get diverted around destructive causes, joining criminal gangs, joining criminality.
Thank you.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Poverty is a major barrier to social mobility, and I'm sure you were as shocked as I was this week when the London Child Poverty Alliance announced the new figures for poverty, not only across the country, but in London. It's increasing. So if I can give you an example, in my own boroughs of Enfield and Haringey, in Tottenham and Edmonton, nearly 49% of our children are living in poverty. This is after housing costs. And across my 2 boroughs, that means 66,000 children are living in poverty. Now, you've already made some progress on this with some of the areas work that I'm doing on your behalf, but also freezing TfL transport costs, more affordable housing. But the main levers come from government. What would you like to see government do to really crack down and tackle this issue of child poverty?
Well, firstly, I think we've got to just say it loud and clear. Austerity is a political choice. Cuts is a political choice. So the government have made a political choice to make cuts over the last 8-9 years. And we shouldn't be embarrassed of saying that, those of us who care about Londoners, but realise that there are consequences of cuts. One of the consequences of cuts is increased poverty. One of the consequences of cuts is that the ladders that were in place to help people escape poverty are being taken away. And that's why it's really important to realise that we've got to persuade this government, as long as it's still in place, to reverse its previous policies and to reverse austerity. I actually watched, unlike Conservatives, a speech made by Theresa May at her party conference. Theresa May said austerity's ended. Well, I've seen no evidence of that. I've seen no evidence in relation to the spring statement or announcements from the government that austerity has ended. We need a reversal of some of the welfare benefit changes. We need to extend the amount of free childcare available to young mums in particular, and carers and parents. We need to make sure there's financial support for young people taking on apprenticeships, whether it's full-time or part-time. We've got to make sure we promote the living wage, so people do the right thing and work, get a decent living wage. We've got to make sure that there's not exploitation around 0 hours working. We've got to support young people who want to have entrepreneurial zeal to set up a business for them to flourish and thrive. I tell you, by the way, what's going to exacerbate the concerns of those of us who are suffering poverty and make things worse is a no-deal Brexit. Because all the evidence is it'll make our city poorer, which will make it less likely that the government's going to be able to address poverty because of less tax revenues from businesses and jobs.
Thank you. And Mr Mayor, I recently published a report which is titled Children Victims of Austerity. And in that I examine some of the factors causing child poverty. And you're right, it's about welfare benefits. It's about the lack of ambition from this government abolishing child poverty targets, for example. And I've asked that actually what the government should do is have a Poverty and Inequality Commission to really have a deep dive and to look at how policies should be tackling this and where they should be directing money. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And one of the things, if I know the reason why we need it, is so ministers can be educated about the causes of some of their policies, because it's quite clear some ministers don't realise what causes poverty.
And Mr Mayor, I travel across London and I visit schools. Normally I visit a school every few weeks, and increasingly teachers are telling me that the issue of poverty is creeping into the classroom. And visiting Seven Sisters Primary School in my borough last year, I was shocked to be led into a classroom to see that it had been turned into a food, clothing and baby bank, because the level of need in Tottenham was so great that the school just felt they had to act. And the NEU have recently come out with a report giving examples of that throughout London and beyond. Are you aware of that report? And is there any further work you can do with schools?
I'm aware of that report, and we are doing lots of work with schools. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the welfare state is supposed to be a safety net for those who are facing difficult times. That safety net's now got so many holes in it because of policies of the last 8 years. You've got teachers bringing into schools things they've got from home to help children, plugging gaps in state provision. We're doing what we can from City Hall, helping schools. You do some of this work in relation to many of the visits you make and conversations you have. We do lots of work in relation to poverty, whether it's period poverty, whether it's poverty in relation to other issues in schools. We're doing what we can to persuade the government to have universal free meals for children, really, really important. And so we will continue to assist boroughs, councils, schools doing this sort of work and others, but also lobby the government at the same time.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Assembly Member Copley, design quality.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely agree. We should be learning from good practice to develop successful and inclusive places. The draft on the plan is clear that all developments should be well designed. Good design is fundamental to good growth. The design of the King's Crescent and Colville estates in Hackney exemplify the high standards we are now setting in the design policies of the draft plan, including building well for the local context, using high quality materials that last, providing fair access to play space and other communal resources, and delivering good quality internal design. Both developments have been celebrated for these reasons, including at the London Planning Awards and the NLA Awards, where in 2018 I awarded the Mayor's Prize to King's Crescent Estate for its approach to social inclusion. The draft London plan is also clear that quality must be maintained throughout the development process. Too often in the past has design looked good at the application stage, with the completed scheme bearing little resemblance to the original plans as costs are cut later in the process. The London plan sets the guidelines, but also doing all we can to support good design more widely across London. Our Good Growth by Design programme uses good design to promote quality and inclusion in the built environment, drawing on existing design expertise, including that of our 15 mayors design advocates. My team at City Hall are now working with the design advocates to produce design guidance that will help put the policies in the draft London plan into action. We've also created the London Review Panel, through which our design advocates provide design scrutiny to projects that City Hall fund. It's important that London's boroughs have the resources they need to deliver quality homes for Londoners. My Home Building Capacity Fund is providing £10 million to support councils increasing their skills and capacity. The social enterprise public practice, with support from City Hall, has now contributed 3,600 days of resources to good design in the public.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sure you will have seen the King's Crescent estate featured in the New York Times recently. So I'm sure the chair will be delighted to see Hackney going global.
All the way.
All the way. I wanted to follow up with some questions about the government's Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which has featured in the press for all the wrong reasons of late. Well, our former colleague here, actually, the Housing Minister, has said that we need to be building beautiful homes, that we need to build the conservation areas of the future. But of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and doesn't necessarily have a bearing on the quality of the homes as a place to live. Do you think that rather than a government-appointed commission to tell us that traditional classical buildings are best to look at, shouldn't we be focused on building homes that are spacious, light, accessible, and make a welcoming home for future generations?
Absolutely. I think this sort of Whitehall diktat is not going to lead to better quality, better design homes in parts of London. Hackney's very different from Havering. Romford's very different from Merton. We've got to recognise heritage in local communities and give them the confidence, but it is a source of pride to me that New York's emulating Hackney, where Hackney lead others follow. That's not a bad thing.
Absolutely, and yes, sticking some neoclassical colonnades on the front of a building isn't necessarily going to make it a nice building to actually live in. And I do welcome your home building capacity fund, because of course after years and years of, after a generation really of councils not building because they weren't able to, they do lack the skills and the technical ability and the development teams to be able to do that. Would you agree, if the government really wants high quality new homes, rather than the commission telling us what to do, shouldn't they just give councils better funding so they can produce modern, innovative and high quality new homes that Londoners need?
Absolutely. You will know this. There are many councillors here. Many councils' planning departments have been hollowed out over the last few years because councils are making tough choices. The number of councils that now employ architects is very, very small. And that's one of the reasons why we started public practice. The idea was to give boroughs access to high quality planning and design expertise, and that's leading to a sea change in relation to expertise boroughs currently now have. That's also one of the reasons why we invested in the home building capacity fund, because councils forgot how to build homes. But actually that shouldn't be coming from City Hall. We can't fill the massive gap left behind. The government's got to invest in giving councils the skills they need to make sure they're the best quality, best designed homes they can, and buildings they can possibly have.
Thank you. And I think that public practice is a fantastic initiative. It's an extraordinary statistic. In 1979, half of all architects began their careers in the public sector. I think now it's less than 1%. But I'm out of time, so thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Now, next question comes. Next question is from Assembly Member Berry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm proud that London is a beacon of open, diverse and inclusive values, and that on the whole we don't just tolerate our differences, we celebrate them. However, we know there are some individuals and groups who remain determined to divide us, to sow the seeds of hatred and to spread perverse and twisted ideologies. This is damaging our society and the cohesion of our communities. Violent extremism, hate and intolerance have no place in our society, regardless of the ideology, whether it's from far-right extremists who are posing a clear and growing threat to the UK and around the world, or violent Islamist groups. The Met Police is taking this threat extremely seriously, and it's something I regularly discuss with the Commissioner and the police. We're also working on a major new programme from City Hall. This is focusing on 3 core areas: safeguarding the vulnerable from radicalisation, stopping the spread of violent extremist ideologies, and strengthening the marginalised communities from extremism. As part of this work, we've just concluded the most comprehensive citywide listening exercise ever undertaken in this policy area, and the findings and recommendations will be published later this spring or early summer. After the tragic attacks in Christchurch and Sri Lanka, we've invited London faith leaders to 2 separate safety and security conferences at City Hall to hear expert advice from specialists on practical measures to keep their worshippers and premises safe. As well as the work we're doing from City Hall, we must also do more to tackle some of the wider societal issues at play. In London, my overriding mission is to make our city work for all Londoners and to provide access to opportunities to help people reach their full potential.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I have to say, I was really sorry to hear about your recent comments about your own security situation and the threats you face. I just want to say that's horrific, and I feel just very sorry for you and your family on that. I wanted to ask a few further questions. The recent article that came out in the Times on the 29th of March from the Commissioner, Sadiq, and Andrew Parker, who's the Director General of MI5, highlighted their concern over what they called the growing threat of violent extremism, and that's what prompted my question, because they especially mentioned the right wing there. You mentioned that you are bringing out some work soon. That's the Countering Violent Extremism programme, and that's been going for a year, is that correct?
Yeah, the research, the surveys, the meeting people, the experts, yeah.
And am I right in thinking that because of the comments that were made by the Commissioner and MI5, that focuses more on right-wing extremism than was anticipated at the beginning of that process?
No, Chair, actually, we foresaw this issue. We'd actually seen an increase in the work Prevent are doing, and also Channel. And so the expert team we've got doing the CVE work includes experts in far-right extremism as well. Because if you listen to Neil Basu, what he says publicly as well as what he says privately, there has been concern for some time. We've seen that not just with the murder of Joe Cox, we've seen that in relation to arrests made in the recent past, but also during the summer of 2017, one of those attacks in London was from a far-right extremist.
Yeah. The article also mentions several pilot projects on sharing intelligence between health and social services and the police. Are any of those pilots taking place in London?
Not City Hall led. I'm not sure about the government ones, but I can check and get back to you.
Would you be able to? That would be really useful. In the Police and Crime Committee this week, we saw that people who are found guilty of racially motivated crimes are dealt with and referred to the the Basic Command Unit safeguarding hubs. And last year, the Police and Crime Committee met with Home Office staff running Prevent, and it seemed at that time it was quite early doors for them in terms of putting together effective programmes and interventions to help people change away from extremist right-wing views and deal with some of the vulnerabilities potentially that might leave them vulnerable to being exploited by right-wing extremist groups. Are there going to be more details about programmes like that in your extremism strategy as it comes forward?
Very good. One of the 3 things they're focusing on is strengthening marginalised communities from extremism, because there are vulnerable people in all parts of our society who are susceptible to being radicalised, groomed or whatever, not just far right but also Islamist groups trying to radicalise and groom as well. And it's making sure that we strengthen those marginalised communities, safeguard those individuals who are vulnerable, but also the communities as well. And then thirdly, stop the spread of these extremist ideologies as well.
Thank you. I look forward to reading the report. Just finally, you mentioned online as well. What progress are you making in removing extremist content from online social media platforms?
That's a really important question. So the criteria for assessing the success of the online hate crime, for example, shouldn't just be prosecutions brought, because what they do very effectively is take things off that are currently online that are offensive or extremist, but also help any victim as well, giving them assistance and help as well. Google, YouTube and Facebook both understand the seriousness of this issue and are taking steps. They're designing algorithms, they have algorithms that can see some of this stuff taking place. They're also more responsive now to the police having conversations. The real challenge, though, is the non-responsible corporates, those who have ISPs outside of our country where we've got less locus. One of the things the Home Secretary did was he went to Silicon Valley and he's spoken to a number of the global companies there to put pressure on them. But we've got to make sure we continue to evolve to find, because people are finding new ways to get this stuff online, we're going to continue to evolve to find quicker ways to get it offline, but also to make sure that ISPs are quicker removing stuff that's clearly extremist, clearly used as propaganda by the far right or Islamist extremists to radicalise people.
Okay, I'm out of time, but yeah, hopefully we can talk more.
Thank you. Next, the answer to Assembly Members Eshel Moley's question, please. Oh, sorry. No, stop there. Assembly Member Desai. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, the hostile environment has to be challenged at all levels. So what can our sporting institutions, particularly our football clubs, be doing in this respect?
Well, you know, it's really important we realise that whether you're a football pundit, and we've seen what happened to Alex Scott, or a football player, some of the stuff they endure is not acceptable. And it's really important that we stand in solidarity with them, but that the footballing authorities show support for those footballers as well. It shouldn't be just Raheem Sterling calling this out, or other named individual players. The authorities should be calling this out as well. And I think the social media companies have got to be quicker at removing people's Twitter account if they are offensive and racist.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, answer to the question from Assembly Member Eshamoli, the spending review.
Thank you, Chair. TfL has experienced unprecedented cuts to its funding from the government, and London is now one of the only major cities in the world to run a public transport network without direct central support from day-to-day running costs. Despite 8 years of austerity, Transport for London continues to invest in vast improvements that benefit everyone travelling in London. 40% of the tube network is currently being modernised, and new signalling on the Circle, District, Hammersmith and City and Metropolitan lines. This will add 33% capacity across the 4 lines. I'm also continuing to make radical air quality and environmental improvements across London, including the world's first ultra-low emission zone and investment to create a modern green bus fleet. Under my leadership, TfL's focus on efficiency has significantly reduced its financial deficit, but this will not be enough to fund the investment London's transport network needs. At this time of uncertainty, the government should be investing across the UK to ensure that cities and regions, including London, have the infrastructure and the public transport services they need to thrive. Vitally, we need to have certainty around funding for the longer term. This would allow TfL to plan effectively, invest properly in the maintenance of existing assets, and commit to some new long-term capital projects.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it is important we have that commitment to some of those long-term capital projects, like, for example, one that I continue to ask you about, the Bakerloo line extension in Southwark. We know that the population in London continues to grow. Even in Southwark, the population is projected to grow by an estimated 63,000 within the next 10 years. And the fact that we have a Prime Minister saying that if a Brexit deal is not agreed, this 3-year spending review may turn to a 1-year review. What effect would that have in terms of TfL's operational budget and day-to-day plans for those big, major capital projects?
It's a huge problem for us. We need certainty in relation to future capital. There's no certainty in relation to devolution of business rates after March 2021. We need certainty in relation to a spending review, and that's delaying us making decisions. So I'll give you one example of a difference that's made already. The Piccadilly line, which needs new signalling. The procurement of that's been paused because we've not had the spending review and because we've got no certainty in relation to what happens with business rates post 2021. You've mentioned other projects from the Bakerloo line extension. There are others, Crossrail 2, Sun line extension, and others. And so the paralysis in government is causing big problems in infrastructure in London.
I think one of the other things is about making that case to government, say these projects, transport projects, it's not just about alleviating transport pressures, it's about regeneration in the area, it's about the jobs, it's about supporting the economy, and that's something that the Bakerloo line would bring. One of the other things was around the National Infrastructure Commission's recommendations around funding for that infrastructure to be 1.2% of the total gross domestic product. Do you know what value that is for London's share if we were to get that funding? And has the government accepted your case to make sure that London receives that vital funding?
Well, it depends on how you measure GDP, but what we do know is that the government's National Infrastructure Commission, which by the government set up, not us, the government set this up, they say that London needs the level of investment we've set out in our transport strategy. So they're saying that the country needs Crossrail 2, and basically the other things in our transport strategy, Bakerloo Line extension, South London Rail metrisation, Sutton Link, all these things benefit not just London but the country as well. Crossrail 1, for example, goes outside of London, both east and west. Crossrail 2 will go outside London, both south and north. But actually, if you think about us as a capital city, the country benefits when we have this level of investment. This is not at the expense of other parts of the country getting investment as well.
Great. No, thank you. I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Members, it's 12:26. Can I ask you if you would support extending... Thank you. Mayor's question time as according to Standing Order 5.10. Yes? Agreed. Thank you. We've only got 3 questions left. Assembly Member Whittle, Article 50.
Chair, I'm not sure if others have had the opportunity to read this question, but it must be a record for the longest question ever, certainly since I became Mayor. The Prime Minister could have secured a Brexit deal that protected jobs, the economy and the rights of EU citizens in the UK while respecting the outcome of the referendum. The Prime Minister could have done this by proposing that Britain left the institutions of the European Union while remaining in both the customs union and the single market. Continued customs union and single market membership is something businesses, business leaders, trade unions and many others have called for. And economic impact assessments, City Hall's own, as well as the government's, show that maintaining customs union and single market arrangements minimise economic harm and avoid the creation of a hard border in Ireland. Our independent economic assessment published last year showed that leaving the single market and customs union would result in nearly 500,000 fewer jobs and nearly £50 billion less investment by 2030. There is a disadvantage to staying in the customs union and single market if we leave the EU, which is that the likes of Norway or Turkey pay the European Union to participate in these arrangements without having a say. That's a less economically damaging outcome than remaining outside the single market and customs union. Let me remind members, there's no consensus even from pro-Brexit advocates on this either. Those several Brexiteers indicated preferences for single market access and a Norway-style solution before the referendum, it's clear that politicians have failed to agree a way forward on a Brexit deal. That's why the best solution out of this mess is to give the British public a final say over Brexit. My view is that instead of running down the clock yet again and then asking for a further extension, the Prime Minister should now put the national interest first and withdraw Article 50 so we can take the prospect of a no deal off the table completely. This would allow the necessary breathing space to give the public the final say on Brexit.
But I do apologise for the long question, actually. It was an equally long answer, so thank you. One thing I would say, Mr. Mayor, which is at the nub of this question, is about Article 50. On the 22nd of June 2016, you said very, very clearly, out is out, and that there will be no going back. And then the following day, we had an historic vote to indeed come out. Do you not think, Mr. Mayor, that in the 2 years since, culminating in you, I think, in an extraordinary way, calling for Article 50 to be revoked, do you not think that your attitude and your pronouncements on this have actually fundamentally damaged the democratic culture in the country, which is what we're actually facing at the moment? There is a real crisis of democracy at the moment.
No.
You don't?
No.
You really don't?
No.
So you don't think that actually by calling for the revocation of Article 50, which is essentially cancelling Brexit, it's cancelling the process, you do not think that that actually causes any problem for democracy at all?
No,
you really don't?
I can't think of anything more democratic than giving the British public a say.
No. You're talking about revoking Article 50.
Oh, what were the
All right, let me try it another way, Mr. Mayor. Look, do you still consider yourself to be a mayor for all Londoners?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, well, 41% of those Londoners voted to leave, right? Don't you think this shows them, at the very least, a huge disrespect that you would actually call for the revocation of Article 50?
Well, I think the disrespect is with those who campaign to leave making promises that prove to be false. So the premise on which the campaign was fought have shown to be not true. So promises were made that we could leave the European Union and have the same terms of trade with them outside the club inside the club. Not true. Promises were made we could do a deal with the EU during the course of an afternoon and have a cup of tea. Not true. Promises were made there'd be hundreds of deals, trade deals, ready to go when we left the EU.
When
Not
you want
true.
to talk, Mr. I've got so little time. When you want to talk about things being said that were untrue, the whole virtue of product fear economically was untrue, right? The whole of it was untrue, and it's still going on now. I repeat, that when you talk about revoking Article 50, right, this has real ramifications for actually people's faith in our whole process. You're a public figure.
I think, Chair, some of us should talk to some of those businesses that have chosen to leave our country over the last 2 years in relation to Project Fair. He should speak to some of those EU citizens who have left our country because of the uncertainty over the last 2 years. He should speak to those who are no longer investing in our country, whether it's Nissan or whether it's Ford who are concerned.
I've got a few seconds. All I would say to you, I think that basically you said out means out, no going back. Right? You never thought people would vote out, and you've never come to terms with it, and you've been trying to undermine it ever since, Mr. Mayor.
You see a Tory Brexit alliance taking place there. It's a Farage and Johnson dream team.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. The Brexit. No, come on. We've got a couple of questions to go. Thank you for your question, Assembly Member Whittle. The next answer I want from you, Mr. Mayor, is to the question from Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. All Londoners should have access to the best health and care services in the world. My formal powers as Mayor of London in relation to the NHS is very limited, but I'm championing and challenging the work of the health and care system whilst working with partners to address the wider causes of Londoners' health. I share Assembly Member Sahota's concerns about increasing waiting times for patients in A&E. As highlighted in his report, the missed 4-hour target is one of many metrics in the NHS which is not performing as expected. These missed targets are a sign of the continued pressures facing the entire health and care system. Staff in London's hospitals and A&E departments do an incredible job in difficult circumstances. Our frontline workers need more support from the government and sustained investment in the services they provide. I regularly meet with senior leaders in the NHS to discuss this and other issues. Performance is always on our agenda, and I help to hold the NHS to account on behalf of all Londoners. However, the NHS alone cannot solve the problem of pressures on A&E. Health, social care and indeed public health services are inextricably linked, and the government's austerity policies in one area will undoubtedly affect other areas too. I'll continue to call on the government to give London the resources it needs to properly invest in the NHS and social care by reversing the cuts to the public health grant.
Answer. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a reduction of 2,300 hospital beds in London. The occupancy rate of beds is much higher than is desirable for safety of care. Can you make sure that through your health board that there are no more bed closures taking place in London without your 6 tests being fulfilled?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why I commissioned Kings to do this piece of work was the concern that you've been raising publicly for some time now about some of the decisions made by the STPs. And my 6 tests have been shared with the health board, and I expect them to be met. Otherwise, any changes will not be to do with major health and care transformation or service configuration will not have my support.
And of course, Mr. Mayor, you will, I'm sure, want to join me in congratulating all those people who campaigned very hard to save the Accident and Emergency Department at Charing Cross Hospital and Ealing Hospital. We told them that it was something they shouldn't have done, and the Secretary of State has now reversed the decision. So would you join me in congratulating the hard work of all the campaigners in West London who saved the beds in Charing Cross and Ealing Hospital?
Well, can I, through you, congratulate not just yourself, but all those campaigners, local residents, a significant number of clinicians, the council, parliamentarians. Success has many periods, but you never gave up, and you carried on lobbying and campaigning. And I'm pleased that this government has done a U-turn on its previous awful decision, and I hope that at least the government listening more to residents and clinicians when it comes to these sorts of decisions.
Of course, you know that it's getting much more difficult now to see a GP in this country. That we had 65 GPs for 100,000 population. Now we have 60 GPs for 100,000. We have a high vacancy rate of nurses in London. We know that it's difficult to get to see a health visitor and midwife. And of course our patients, when they, and also the waiting time on the trolleys has doubled in the last 1 year. People waiting more than 12 hours has doubled. Given this, of course, we will meet constituents in our daily lives who will complain about the NHS and say what their problems are. And it's very important that politicians don't dismiss their concerns as pure hype. This is the real experience of people who experience the people in the NHS.
Well, Chair, can I say, I find it offensive that anybody would characterise the concerns people raise about the NHS as hype. I think it's not hype when we've lost over 2,300 beds in London. It's not hype when we have increasing pressures on overstretched staff and fewer left on frontline. It's not hype when we have examples of patients lying on trolleys for more than 12 hours, doubling over the last few years. Any politician who thinks this is hype is not fit to hold public office.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being so clear in your answer.
Thank you. The next is... Sorry.
It's question in the name of Assembly Member Fiona Twycross, which I'll take on for subsidiary.
Yes, it's about children's future food inquiry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Soto, for asking Fiona Twycross's question. The Children's Future Food Inquiry highlighted some of the devastating consequences of food insecurity at a national scale. Over 4 million children are living in poverty in the UK, many of them in households that are unable to afford enough food, let alone a balanced and healthy diet. The powerful and moving testimonies to the inquiry from young food ambassadors from across the country show that food insecurity affects behaviour, mental and emotional well-being and academic attainment. In London, the latest figures show that Trussell Trust food banks handed out emergency food parcels to almost 60,000 children alone last year. It's an unacceptable situation compounded by the impacts of welfare reforms, the freeze to working age benefits and employers failing to pay their staff the London living wage. It has a profound impact on our children and young people's social mobility, as evaluation findings from the Kitchen Social Programme have shown, which we have supported to deliver healthy meals and holiday activities to children at risk of hunger during the school holidays.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. You will know that the inquiry advocated a charter for the right to food charter, and I'm asking you, would you please back that call for food charter? Would you write to the government asking them to implement the independent food watchdog so that we take a lead on this, right, and make sure the government is keeping an eye on what's happening with children's food poverty?
Yeah, the Assembly Member will be pleased to know that the London Food Board, my London Food Board, consists of members who directly contributed to the Children's Future Food Inquiry Report, and so I'll continue to work with board members to ensure we act upon the relevant recommendations in London.
Okay. The other thing is, Mr. Mayor, of course, that the inquiry has found 15 young food ambassadors. You see, young people who voice the concerns of children right across London and the UK, and these have inspiring stories to share, inspiring experiences to share. Would you please be prepared to meet them as Mayor of London?
Yeah, my team are more than happy to, and I've already we're at the launch of the report and listened to the testimony of some of these young food ambassadors, and I'll make sure that my team continues to work with not just the young food ambassadors, but other partners doing really important work in this area.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And also, you know that school meals are very important for the education of children. There are some children who don't have access to government public funds, but so they are exempted from free school meals. And I think there's a very strong argument for universal free school meals. Would you please advocate this to the government that they should make this available right across the country?
Absolutely. I mean, for those who haven't got recourse to public funds, it means they're not entitled to free school meals. And so the good news is that my London Food Strategy includes a commitment to work with partners to lobby the government to provide universal free school meals for all. It's really important.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Shalom.
Mr. Mayor, just following on from that, you may be aware of the Pecan Food Trust Food Bank in Peckham, and on the 1st of May, the Bishop of Southwark opened the first of its kind Peckham Pantry in London. And this is based on a membership scheme where local residents and families can pay £15, but actually they can come to that pantry and buy a lot more than £15 worth of food shopping. So going a long way to help address the issues around food poverty and the number of families relying on the food banks. Very much appreciate that your diary is busy, but could I ask that you look at maybe trying to visit that pantry sometime in the future?
Absolutely. I'm one of the Bishop of Suffolk's biggest fans. I'm more than happy to go and visit the pantry. Another example, by the way, of the massive contribution made to our city by faith communities, including the churches. So I'm more than happy to.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And the final question is from Assemblymember Arnold on London's teaching challenges.
Thank you. City Hall's Teach London campaign has responded to the needs of London schools by boosting support for teacher recruitment and retention in the capital. This has become an acute problem for schools despite the attractions of starting a career in London with all the great opportunities and resources teachers have. Teach London provides web-based resources to help schools with recruitment, including a London teacher training map, promotion of recruitment events and links to teaching jobs in London's boroughs. It also includes a brochure for school leaders which shares our key research findings on the challenges, as well as providing ideas to help them retain our existing great teachers, such as around flexible working and housing. Exclusive opportunities for London teachers are also highlighted, such as our London Curriculum Programme, which Ofsted and others cite as an exemplar of how to provide a more enriched curriculum and reduce teacher workload. Similarly, their pupils will benefit from participating in Healthy Schools London. This encourages schools to support staff in maintaining their health and well-being, to lead healthy lifestyles and to be positive role models. London schools are also signing up to my Healthy Workplace Award, which helps support teachers' mental health and well-being. The first 100 schools have taken up mental health first aiders training funded through the Young Londoners Fund. Our Teach London support includes a digital campaign to attract and encourage new graduates in Teach London, particularly seeking more BAME trainees to improve the diversity in London's teacher workforce. There is a clear underrepresentation of BAME teachers compared with London's pupil population. Research shows the importance of career development for retaining all and especially BAME teachers. That's why I'm pleased to say that over half of the participants in this year's Getting Ahead London, my programme to support more senior leaders into headship, are from BAME backgrounds, and 2/3 are women. Schools in London have fed back on the value of Teach London and how it has helped increase the pressure on the Department of Education to improve its national teacher recruitment support. Yet the schools leading on teacher training are still reporting difficulties in filling places this year. It's vital that government continues to step up in this area and give more support at a time when our schools face so much pressure on budgets through this government's schools funding policies.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. And can I just commend the Deputy Mayor, Assemblymember McCartney, for the work that she's led in this area, and things have absolutely improved certainly over the last 2 years. And I welcome what you had to say about the increased numbers of people of BAME heritage within that cohort now, going forward and working in our schools. And can I just say to you, I haven't got the time now, but it's a topic that I will be returning to over the year, because it is essential that we not just have teachers, but that retain them, but that they also represent the population that they serve. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
It's not simply recruiting them, retaining them, progression as well.
And progression, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so Assembly...
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Assemblymember Duval.
Chair, one of the important things in the devolution ask, surely over the coming years, it won't happen overnight, that we in London take more control, working within a national setting around the Ofsted and planning for school provisions. I don't think there's any one London borough that's happy with the present relationships with the different czars and the competing and sometimes incoherent approaches that they take. And would it be better to bring it closer back to strategic London, as well as working more collaboratively with the boroughs?
Absolutely. You should hear some of the war stories Deputy Mayor McCartney's and I've heard from teachers about the North and South divide and the way it's split. It's not fit for purpose, and it needs to change. And a London model that's relevant to our needs is far more sensible than what we've got at the moment.
And in this fragmented education system that we've got, I think there's some real challenges around that. I've mentioned it before, but can you use your voice in raising the support for support staff? Teachers are important and they're key, and good ed teachers and leadership are key to work, to provide the opportunities for our young people and to get improved grades and open up those opportunities. But equally, the unsung work done by support staff in terms of making that contribution goes unrewarded because others in authority don't speak up for them. Will you do that? Will you use an occasion when you're in an education gathering to make mention around work of support staff?
Absolutely. Can I say this? One of the problems of education in England being so fragmented is the lack of oversight from councils, let alone City Hall. Compare and contrast Scotland. In different schools have different policies, different recruitment policies. Well, one of the things that I've been doing is working with the GMB, the trade union, who've raised the issue of the terms and conditions of their members, teaching assistants, midday supervisors, who are so important. Midday supervisors that can make the difference between a child finishing their meal or not, learning how to use a knife and fork or not. Teaching assistants can make all the difference in a classroom where a child may need additional help who otherwise may be disruptive, and everyone benefits. And by the way, the lack of intervention at an early stage can lead to that child later on being excluded or having all sorts of issues. So it's a big issue. Head teachers get it, by the way. Chairs of governing bodies get it, but you'll appreciate some of the challenges they've got as well. And so you're right not to forget not just head teachers and teachers, but also the teaching staff team that goes on to the running of a successful school.
And we don't appear to have this problem in London, but today in the media is running with the headlines around those parents who are concerned around teaching about relationships and the type of relationships that we see. What do you say to those parents to either reassure them or to challenge their notions around why their young children should be taught about different forms of relationships, different types of families?
I think one of the things we've got to recognise is, yes, of course, parents have choice, but actually one of the deals we make when we enter into a social contract, being a citizen of this city, this country, is respecting others and respecting that we live in a society where people are different. And when you saw and heard West Street MP last night on Newsnight talking powerfully about his personal experience as somebody who is now out as a gay man, but the fact that he can balance the task of being a gay MP, representing a diverse community with a situation where there's respect. And that's the sort of model we want all our children to grow up to be, where they can be whoever they want to be, but also respect each other. And some of the things I've seen on my TV from parents in other parts of the country is shocking. It's heartbreaking for those children going to the school who may have a mum or a dad, or dad and a dad from different family circumstances who are maybe gay or other or lesbian. We'll see people protesting about their family, and imagine the impact it has on those kids, those children, but also imagine the impact it has on those children who are being brainwashed by mum and dad, being told that because somebody else is LGBT+, they're somehow lesser than you are. And that's why I welcome the government accepting that they need to include relationship advice as part of the curriculum. We've got to make sure those parents who don't understand the importance of that explain the reason why it's important.
And then finally, I suppose, in terms of the challenges facing in the recruitment in the education sector, and we see it in other sectors as well, in the public service, is there a time where we in London might need to call a summit of all the interested parties about recruitment post-Brexit to see how we can boost recruitment in those areas, whether it's a supply of housing, private, rented, part rent, part buy, in terms of those sectors, but particularly around teachers. But someone's got to call that, because there doesn't seem to be or appear to be the leadership. The NHS is doing some great work for their staff and reaching out beyond. I think it's the small shoots. But do you think we should be thinking about doing something like that in the coming year?
So,
years?
Deputy Mayor Carney has called summits before since she's had the role that she's got. I mean, the number one issue is housing, lack of genuine affordable housing. And that's one of the reasons why we should all welcome the record-breaking last year, and the record-breaking year before, during my administration, in building genuinely affordable homes. With surplus NHS land, we've managed to make sure that the new homes that are going to be built there are ring-fenced for NHS staff. Question, can we do the same deal with surplus DfE land? We've got to talk to the DfE. We haven't got control over all surplus public land in London. There is an issue, though, about definition of what used to be called key sector workers, definition of which member of the school staff would be eligible. We all know bus drivers are key sector workers, you know, teaching assistants are key sector workers, you know, other members of public sector are key sector workers. And so it's a difficult balance to strike. That's why what we've got to do is accelerate the amount of genuinely affordable homes, so homes are affordable to all Londoners, including teachers, teaching assistants and others.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. We come to the end of the Q&A with the Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for your responses to members' questions. And thanks to Assembly members for the ongoing work that you do on behalf of Londoners and our great city. Let's go to Part B. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked.
Agree.
All responses. Then petitions. This is unusual for us to take a petition here, but I've agreed because of unusual circumstances. Can I ask the Assembly to agree that we suspend Standing Order 3.20 and that we receive the petition in the name under the name of Assembly Member Copley? Agreed? Yes. Can I ask Assembly Member Copley to present the petition listed on the agenda in his name?
Thank you. This is a petition signed by 348 people, the prayer of which reads, "Stop the Isleworth bus cuts. New proposals will mean more overcrowding, even longer waiting times and major route cuts to buses, such as the H37, and leave many without a direct 110 bus route to the West Middlesex Hospital stop. Sign this petition to call on TfL to halt their planned cuts to our bus services and guarantee protection for the 110 hospital bus service."
Thank you very much. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chair of Transport for London for a response? Agreed. Item 6, date of next meeting. The next meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 6th June, in this chamber at City Hall. See you then. Bye. Oh, no, sit still. No. Just reminded that there's a briefing for members on Crossrail 2 in room 1.2W, and you'll be fed there. See you there at 1 o'clock. Bye. Don't bang the gavel.